in the world. A mere 11% of girls get the exercise they need, and a staggering 43% of girls aged 15 are fat. What can we do about bloated British bairns? And that's all coming in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Delighted to have your company. Well, the day after that dramatic snap election was called on this show yesterday, now we're having to face another shock, and it's this. Nigel Farage isn't going to stand in Britain. He's instead going to help Donald Trump in America with the grassroots conservative movement. Do you think Nigel is abandoning Britain when it needs him the most? Or actually, has he served his time here? Does first past the post prevent any meaningful interaction from him? And actually, is the bigger battle to save the entire Western world from woke, from net zero, from uncontrolled immigration, does that bigger battle lie in America? I want your responses on this. Has Nigel betrayed Britain, or has he done the right thing? Please send your messages. I'll read as many as I can before the end of the show. I've already got over 600 come through on this. It's sent you berserk. Get in touch, gbnews.com/you'll say. But before we start the show, it's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much, and good afternoon from the newsroom, 2 minutes past 3. And I just want to start by bringing you some breaking news that we're getting from the Metropolitan Police this afternoon, that a 64-year-old man has been charged with assisting the Russian intelligence service. Howard Phillips has been remanded in custody. That's after a counter-terrorism investigation into suspected offences under the National Security Act. We understand he is expected to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court later this afternoon. Any more details on that we will, of course, bring to you later in the hour. In other news, the Prime Minister says that voters should back him if they want the Rwanda deportation scheme to succeed, but concedes that flights won't get off the ground before the general election. Rishi Sunak also says he's putting the economy and global security at the heart of his campaign. It comes as political party leaders have begun their 6 weeks of trying to win votes after it was announced that polls will open on the 4th of July. The timing of the announcement came as a surprise to some, with Labour polling 20 points ahead. Kicking off the Conservative campaign this morning, Rishi Sunak claimed that Labour would do absolutely nothing to stop the votes.
Everyone else is starting to agree with my approach, which is bold. The one person that doesn't is Keir Starmer. That's a choice at this election. He thinks that we should just offer an amnesty to illegal migrants to make us the soft touch of Europe. It would make us a magnet for thousands of migrants coming from everywhere. So that's the choice at this election. Do you think my plan is the right one? Do you think I'm the one that's taking bold action to secure our borders and to stop the boats? Or do you think he's going to do that? And it's pretty clear that on this issue, not only does he not share the country's values that it's a problem, he's going to do absolutely nothing about it.
And starting his election campaign in the southeast of England earlier, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says that what the Conservatives have done to the country is unforgivable and that voters don't need to put up with it.
Rishi Sunak clearly does not believe in his Rwanda plan. I think that's been clear from this morning, because he's not going to get any flights off. I think that tells its own story. I don't think he's ever believed that plan is going to work, and so he's called an election early enough to have it not tested before the election. We have to deal with the terrible loss of control of the border under this government. We have to tackle the small boats that are coming across. Nobody should be making that journey.
Meanwhile, the deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper, has ruled out a possible coalition with the Conservatives.
People want politicians to be talking about our NHS and social care and about the cost of living crisis. People are struggling to see a GP, they're struggling to see a dentist, they're battling long waiting lists, they're worried that if you call an ambulance it won't turn up, and on top of all of that they're still struggling to pay the bills, to put food on the table. Liberal Democrats have been utterly relentless about talking about these issues for the last few months and years, and we're going to keep on talking about the NHS and the cost of living over the next 6 weeks.
And in Scotland in the last hour or so, the First Minister John Swinney has said that most voters want to see the back of what he called the disastrous Conservative government.
Never has a government deserved to lose more than Rishi Sunak's government. You want higher living standards and a fairer country where everyone can lead secure, happy, healthy lives. You want a national health service you can rely upon. Most of you think that Brexit was a terrible mistake. You don't think Westminster works for Scotland, and you want Scotland to have a strong voice. All of those things sum up what I am about.
In other news, official estimates show that net migration fell to 685,000 in 2023. The Office for National Statistics says that's down 10% from the record of 764,000 in 2022. Figures suggest just over 1.2 million people arrived in the UK last year, while 532,000 are likely to have left the country. The family of a 10-year-old who died in a mudslide in North Yorkshire say she was a happy and bubbly, go-lucky little girl. Primary school student Leah Harrison was killed yesterday afternoon. After getting into difficulty near Carlton Bank, it was believed she was on a school trip at the time. It's understood that Mount Pleasant Primary School, where she was a student, have said that the incident is a heartbreaking tragedy and that Leah was a much-loved part of the school community. Alan Bates, the lead campaigner for justice in the post office scandal, says he has no sympathy for Paula Venables. The former head of the post office is giving evidence on the second day of her much-anticipated questioning. Earlier, the Horizon inquiry heard that the company had received legal advice against a review of its IT system because it would open the floodgates to damages claims. But Paula Venables says she wasn't aware of those claims. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sam. We've got an action-packed show ahead. Let's get stuck in. Now, general election battle lines are firmly being drawn as Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer begin hitting the campaign trail and laying out their visions for the future of the country. And the Prime Minister was in Derbyshire this morning and sought to draw dividing lines on evergreen issues like the economy and immigration. He claimed that economic stability had returned, but appeared to admit that flights to Rwanda would not take off before the election. Meanwhile, the Labour leader attacked the Conservatives' record on the economy and said his party was in the service of working people. Well, our political correspondent Olivia Utley now joins us live from Downing Street. Olivia, welcome to the show. The morning after, the night before, as it were, they're both in full campaign mode. Shall we start with the extraordinary admission from Rishi Sunak that, after all, flights to Rwanda, a key policy, a headline piece of legislation, might not even happen?
Well, absolutely. Rishi Sunak promised to stop the boat. He was planning to do that with the Rwanda scheme. He managed to get the Rwanda scheme through Parliament eventually. It took a long time. But now it looks almost certain that no flights will actually take off before the 4th of July. Now, we know that Rishi Sunak originally wanted flights to depart before the spring. Even so, it sounds as though Rishi Sunak is keen to make immigration a big talking point of the election campaign. Now, why is that when demonstrably he seems to have not done too well on tackling it? Well, I think it's because he thinks that Labour would do an even worse job. Their plan is pretty thin, and in an interview with GB News earlier, Yvette Cooper sort of evaded, dodged and talked only in skeleton terms about Labour's plan for immigration. What Rishi Sunak is trying to set this up as is, if you vote for us on the 4th of July, then flights for Rwanda will leave on the 5th, 6th, 7th of July. Those flights are almost ready to go. That's what the message we're getting out of Downing Street is. If you vote for Labour, not only is there no clear plan for immigration, but also those flights, which will be about to go on to the Conservatives, will be dropped, will be scrapped. That's what Labour have said they're going to do. That's the Conservatives' message, but it is pretty tricky to fight an election on the grounds of illegal immigration when you have pledged to stop the boats and have totally failed to do that. In fact, the numbers of small boats have gone up on last year, even though there was a little dip under Rishi Sunak earlier this year and the year before. So it's going to be a pretty tough sell for the Prime Minister. The other issue which he's certainly going to try and centre this general election around is the economy. And there is slightly better news. He has managed to cut inflation, again, one of his 5 pledges, now down to 2.3% from 11% in October 2022. But, of course, people aren't actually feeling that much richer, at least not yet. Everyone thought that the Prime Minister was going to wait until the autumn, when interest rates have hopefully gone down a little bit and the money in people's pocket felt a little bit more. He hasn't chosen to do that. He's chosen to hope that the people accept that the economic picture is rosier, that a corner is being turned, even if they can't feel it themselves. The Conservatives will make this about immigration and the economy if they possibly can. What will Labour's fight back be?
Well, Olivia, thank you. Downing Street, the sun is shining on you in a way it didn't on Rishi Sunak yesterday. We'll come back to you later in the show. And joining me now is Sir John Curtis, the legendary polling expert and professor of politics at the University of Strathclyde. Welcome to the show, John. It's always an absolute pleasure. You wrote a fascinating piece in the papers today saying Rishi had better be an extraordinary campaigner. And what you're saying there, if I read between the lines, is all of the polling, all of the evidence seems to suggest that Rishi Sunak is going to have to pull the mother of all rabbits out of a hat to have any chance of winning the next general election. Tell me some more.
Yeah, I mean, the honest truth is that all the historical precedents stand against him. Now, historical records are there to be broken, but breaking the historical records is indeed the challenge that Mr. Sunak has faced himself. So let's go through a few examples. So the last time a Prime Minister called a general election this far behind the polls, actually somewhat further behind in the polls, was John Major in 1997. Despite his best efforts during the election campaign itself, Conservative support only rose by 1 point. Labour's lead actually fell primarily because the Liberal Democrats gained ground. What was the historical backdrop to this? Well, the historical backdrop was, of course, that the Conservatives got into trouble in that Parliament in the immediate wake of the market crisis of 1992, Black Wednesday, when the pound was forced out of the European exchange rate mechanism. Mr. Sunak now is having to persuade voters to vote for him, despite having presided over his predecessor presiding over the market crisis of September and October 2022, Ms. Truss's fiscal event. And the historical records say that governments that preside over market crises, including Labour ones, do not survive at the ballot box. Indeed, then also, you've just been talking a little bit about how, well, there are the first signs perhaps of economic recovery. John Major had 4.5 years of the best record of economic growth since 1945 at that point. But the voters just weren't willing to forgive him for that market drama. So that, again, this is just some simple examples from history, from Conservative Party history, as to how Mr. Sunak is going to have to achieve objectives and turnarounds that John Major was not able to do in the past.
And of course, the last time we had a snap election was 2017 with Theresa May. Yeah. The Conservatives were 20 points ahead, and they almost blew that. Does a snap election have any particular impact on people's mindsets? I mean, Rishi Sunak would like to think that he's in the driving seat, but does it have any impact on when you call an election quickly, historically?
Well, of course, I mean, maybe to a degree, insofar as in the middle of a parliament, certainly like in 2017, voters may have been quite tuned out, not expecting election, not particularly thinking that much about who they're going to vote for. And then in the context of the sight of a Prime Minister who had many admirable qualities, but who I think by her own admission was pretty inept and uncomfortable at campaigning, against Jeremy Corbyn, who proved to be rather better at it than most people anticipated. So voters got new information at a time where they weren't necessarily thinking about it. Now, at the moment, at least, voters have probably tuned into the fact that there was a general election coming not that too long in the distant future. Indeed, the polls have been suggesting that many voters were quite keen to have an election now, and to that extent, at least, they'll be grateful for the opportunity that Mr. Sunak has given them. And given also the relative stability in the polls since the autumn of 2022 and the way Mr. Sunak has failed in the last 18 months to be able to turn things around, again, you can see why perhaps in this snap election, which isn't really anything like a snap as 2017 or indeed 2019, isn't perhaps necessarily going to be so easy to persuade voters to change their minds. One thing, of course, to say about 2017, that is the one election where indeed the lead changed dramatically. So if Mr. Sunak could achieve what Jeremy Corbyn achieved against Theresa May in 2017, maybe we could knock 10 points off Labour's lead. That's how I make the calculation. But that would still leave Labour 11 points ahead.
So, Sir John, you concluded your article today by saying, can Rishi Sunak achieve something in 6 weeks that he hasn't in 18 months? Could you do something as crude as give me a percentage chance of Rishi Sunak winning this election based purely on the polling and the data in front of you now?
Well, look, I've long been in the public domain as saying that there's a 99% chance that Sir Keir Starmer is the next Prime Minister. That's not just to do with the scale of the polling challenge that Mr. Sunak faces. It's also that if he does succeed quite dramatically in reducing Labour's lead, and we get into hung parliament territory, because neither the Liberal Democrats nor the SNP are willing to help sustain a minority Conservative administration, the Conservatives will still be out on the air. Mr. Sunak has to get all the way back to 320 or so seats. That means at least being a few points ahead of Labour. So that's, let's say he's 25 points off his target at the moment.
Okay, and as you said, Sir John Curtis, that will take one heck of an extraordinary campaign. Thank you very much for joining us, Sir John Curtis, polling expert and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. Always a delight. Now, let's go to Stormont now, speak to GBNews' Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, always a delight to have you on the show. We were just talking there about that snap election in 2017. And, of course, the DUP became absolutely pivotal. That confidence and supply to the Conservative Party cost them £1 billion, but it kept them in power. Doogie, what's the political landscape now on your side of the sea there in Northern Ireland?
Well, it's totally fascinating, Martin. I mean, we have 18 seats in Northern Ireland. 8 of those are held by the DUP, 7 by Sinn Féin, but they are an abstentionist party. They don't take those seats. Then we have 2 by the SDLP and 1 by the Alliance Party. But out of those 18 seats, 6 of them are very, very slim majorities, including Gavin Robertson, the now leader of the DUP seat in East Belfast. If the TUV do decide to run in there, the chances are the Alliance Party will take that seat. We have a 3-way battle shaping up in North Down between the sitting MP, the only Alliance MP, an independent candidate, and the Ulster Unionist Party. So it is more than likely the Alliance Party will hold that seat. But more fascinating for me is what goes on with Sinn Féin at this minute in time. As you and I have spoke about the immigration problems in the Republic of Ireland, they're battling a European election that will take place on the 7th of June. We'll not really know how the facts and figures shake out of that till about the 14th, 15th of June when we start to analyse it, and that may well change Sinn Féin's policies in Northern Ireland, because some of their biggest seats are held along the borders of Tyrone, Fermanagh and Armagh, and of course we've seen what's happening in the Republic, and that could really cause the tables to shift. The likes of Fermanagh South Tyrone was below 100 votes that actually got Sinn Féin in the last time. So you would imagine that the Unionists will put in some sort of United Unionist candidate in there to try and take that seat back. So very strange times in Irish politics. Nationalism, republicanism, unionism, and they're all in flux because of Brexit. And of course the Rwanda deal was stopped here in Northern Ireland as well. And that's in the courts next Wednesday, which of course Ricci would either had to have jettisoned Northern Ireland from that and left us inside the EU, or brought it through the courts to fight it out. So Unionists, if there's a minority government because of that, may not be keen to back the Tory party again.
Thank you for that update live from Stormont. Always a pleasure. Now, moving on, Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have drawn swords over tackling illegal migration ahead of the 4th of July general election. The Prime Minister admitted earlier today that the first flights to Rwanda will not take off before the next election, with the Labour leader slamming the government's plan and vowed to clean up the migration mess of 14 years of Tory leadership. Well, with us now is GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, two fascinating points to pick on. First of all, this astonishing admission that a flight might not even take off before the next general election. And secondary, the net migration figures today, yet more bad news for the Conservatives.
Yeah, I have to say I was very surprised that Rishi Sunak, in his first round of broadcast interviews after the election was called, should indicate that they are unlikely, it seems, to get any flights off the ground before the election in July. We were talking yesterday afternoon, and I was suggesting that actually, you know, there are some plus points in going that bit early, but one of them hinges on the ability to get at least a couple of the flights off the ground. Then you don't have to show that the policy as such has been a success in acting as a deterrent, but you absolutely show that you're delivering on your promise to get the flights off the ground. But by not doing that, I think it's quite a difficult sell for the electorate. But this is what Rishi Sunak said when he spoke on GB News earlier today.
Plan is going to work, and I announced a little while ago all the preparations that we've put in place to get those flights off. So we've trained hundreds of caseworkers, we've identified the cohort of the first people that will be sent, we've got an airfield on standby, we've booked flights, we've got the escorts ready, and as people have been watching on their TV screens and in the papers, we've already started detaining those who will then be removed in subsequent flights. And that's a choice at this election, Ellie. If you elect me, if I'm Prime Minister on the 5th of July, those flights will go off to Rwanda and we will begin to put in place the deterrent that we need to stop the boats.
So you have a situation, Martin, where several weeks have now passed since the Rwanda bill passed, and 6 more weeks have still to pass before the election on July the 4th. Ample time, many would argue, to just get some flights off the ground to show that the policy is working and that the government is determined to make it work. When you don't do that, when you acknowledge very publicly right at the start of this campaign that those flights are unlikely to take off before the 4th of July, then you allow the opposition to do what they've done today, which is to come out and say the whole Rwanda policy is just a con. This is what Yvette Cooper said to us a little earlier.
The problem with the Rwanda scheme is this is £500 million of taxpayers' money for a scheme that was only ever going to cover around 1% of asylum seekers. No plan for the 99%. The reason that Rishi Sunak has called the general election now is because he knows it's not going to work over the summer.
But could the government really, at the end of the day, maybe pull a rabbit out of the hat with this one? Well, it was suggested to me by sources a little earlier that we are misrepresenting what the Prime Minister has said, and that perhaps his caution was more to do with the fact that there will undoubtedly be legal challenges in the weeks ahead. So he doesn't want to suggest that this will definitely happen if perhaps it won't. However, you know, by just acknowledging already that it's not going to happen, it just allows Yvette Cooper and others to do exactly what they've done. I mean, surely if you're determined to get the flights off the ground, regardless of the court challenge, you say this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to approach it. And if the courts do what the courts do, well, that's another thing to argue in your favour.
Astonishing stuff, Mark White. And in the next hour, we'll talk about the legal migration figures, but we've run out of time for now. Mark White, excellent as always. Speak to you again soon. Now, I have loads more on that story throughout the show. There's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. You've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. Now, coming up, the Prime Minister says he called the election because his party has put the economy back on track. But do those claims add up? I'll be joined shortly by Liam Halligan to discuss it. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The most sexiest man in the UK at the moment, as voted for by a dating website, is that man on your screen, Jeremy Clarkson. I'm sorry, Peter, I know he's a man of a certain age, but I'm not getting this one.
Are you not?
No.
This is another reason for an old wrinkly like me to be deeply joyous. Hope springs eternal. He's grey-haired, he's balding, he's got a bit of a pot belly, he's quite tall. You know, I reckon I might be in with half a shower.
As long as only hope springing eternal, love. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of guys watching this will really be a bit befuddled as to how he's the sexiest guy. I think it's a sympathy vote.
No, I get it. I understand it.
But he's got a sense of humour,
yeah,
and he's got plenty of money.
But what's there to understand? How is he the sexiest man?
I'll tell you why. Because he's and I say this as a bloke, he's a man's man. He gets stuck in, he's involved, he's practical, he's physical.
Does that make him
funny?
Sexy, though?
He's got money. I think men these days, if you ask me, too effeminate. Women don't want that. Women, well, I don't know what...
What do women want? Go on, just mansplain to me what women want. Go on,
sorry, tell us,
thank you very much. No, this is voted for by an illicit dating website, OK?
Oh, was it an affairs website?
Married women. But Idris Elba came third.
I just think Jez he's a man's man. Like I said, he's physical, he gets involved, he likes a beer, he's got plenty of money. How much did he get for the farm on Amazon?
That's so silly. So you're implying women only go for men with money?
Well, no, but I mean...
He did, didn't he? Just said that, yeah. He's got plenty of money, so they're very sexy.
It's normal for women to want to be with a man who can look after them, no?
No. Will you stop mansplaining what women want?
My mum had an expression, Ben. She said, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. But trust me, if Idris Elba gets himself a pair of wellies, he'll be second next year.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:28 your time, and I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, they say economists decide elections, and Rishi Sunak has certainly chosen his time carefully. The Prime Minister appears to have done well, fulfilling his pledge to halve inflation and grow the economy, saying he has put the economy back on track. But with interest rates still stubbornly high, it's 5.25%. And the tax burden at an all-time record since the World War II of 70-year high. Will Labour do a better job? Well, joining us now to discuss this is GB News' economics and business editor Liam Hannigan with On the Money. Liam, a delight to have you in the studio. So Rishi's been out and about today saying the economy is back on track. My plan is working, but there's some key figures out today you want to discuss with me from the Purchasing Managers Index. Tell me more.
Indeed, the big thought here, Martin, is that the inheritance that any incoming Labour government will get off the Tories will be very, very different from Tony Blair's inheritance in 1997. Yeah. Ken Clarke and the Tories handed over an economy in pretty good shape with debt to GDP of 30% of GDP. We're now at 100% of GDP, much less room to spend, much more need to get in tax revenue because the country's finances are so tightly stretched post-COVID. That's the big thought. Now, some numbers came out today. They're called PMI indices, the Purchasing Managers Index. These are surveys of business leaders, people running little plumbing outfits with one van or people running big companies with hundreds of employees. The PMI surveys are taken all over the world, and they're kind of a preemptive way of looking at the economy. Not official GDP numbers, but they're survey numbers. Let's have a look at what they actually say. Manufacturing is about 10 to 15% of the UK economy, and the manufacturing PMI in May was up from 49.1 to 51.3. That's the highest manufacturing PMI in 22 months. And crucially, Martin, if the PMI measure is above 50, that points to economic growth. So clearly, the manufacturing sector is now growing for the first time in a while. The service sector PMI covers a much bigger share of the economy, covers about 70 to 80%. That fell from 55 to 52.9, so it fell marginally, and that is a sixth-month low for our services PMI, but they're both above 50, these numbers. So manufacturing and services, that's pretty much the economy.
Yeah.
And they're both showing growth. And there are many economies around the world, not least in continental Europe, that will give their eye teeth at the moment for PMI numbers like that.
Despite Brexit. But that brings me to the next question. Liam, you and I have been cogitating for many, many weeks and months that would suit a later election to give the economy time to warm up. On the basis of that evidence, why has Rishi gone so early?
I think it's partly because the inflation number yesterday, while it came down from 3.2% in March to 2.3% in April, it was still well above the 2% Bank of England target. It still means there's pretty much no way the Bank of England's going to cut interest rates when the Monetary Policy Committee next meets on the 20th of June. There's no MPC meeting in July. They only meet 8 months a year. They miss some months out. So the first time interest rates could possibly go down and the numbers would keep needing to get more benign between now and then is August.
Wow.
And we originally thought we'd see a rate cut in March, April, May, June. But inflation has remained, the opposite of transitory, like the Bank of England said. It's remained stubbornly high. So I think it's partly because it now looks as if we're probably only going to get one interest rate cut, if any. Inflation could go up over the summer before an autumn election. And also, Downing Street must be thinking maybe things could go even worse over the summer. An influx of small boats over the summer. That's usually what happens in the summer months. Maybe inflation could start turning up again, as it has in America. And the UK and America, the economies are quite closely aligned. So for all these reasons, when it became clear things weren't going to get much, much better on the economic front with many interest rate cuts before an autumn election, I think Downing Street thought, well, things could actually get worse. Let's go now.
Super stuff. Liam Halligan, as ever, in a nutshell, bang on the money. There's loads more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, but first it's your headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 3:34. Your top stories this hour. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused the Prime Minister of never believing in his own Rwanda plan. It's after Rishi Sunak admitted flights carrying migrants will not take off before the general election in July. However, speaking as he started his election campaign in Derbyshire, the Conservative leader says the scheme will continue if he's re-elected. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage has confirmed he won't be standing as a candidate, but will help the Reform UK campaign. Next, a recap of the breaking news from the Metropolitan Police in the last hour. A 64-year-old man has been charged with assisting the Russian intelligence service. Howard Phillips has been remanded in custody after a counter-terrorism investigation into suspected offences under the National Security Act. He's expected to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court later this afternoon. And in some other breaking news, Mohamed Noor has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years for a series of attacks targeting strangers in South London. He was convicted of the murder of Johannita Kasiwa Daubney, whose throat was cut with a makeshift blade in Brixton in May of last year. Noor was also found guilty of 3 other attacks 2 days before her death. And a record of more than 68,500 people were granted refugee status or other types of leave to remain in the year to March. Home Office figures show that's the highest number of any 12-month period since records began. Meanwhile, the total asylum backlog still stands at more than 100,000. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2720 and €1.1738. The price of gold is £1,848 and 74 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,350 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. There's queues for 3 miles if you're heading clockwise on the M60 at Barton. Junction 11's queuing back to Stretford. At Junction 7, an obstruction down the road, so a lane closure in place. Slow southbound down the M5 from the M50, Junction 8 to Tewkesbury at 9. There was an issue that's now been dealt with, but still slow going. All lanes are open. Major issues for the M4 in South Wales this afternoon between Pyle and Porthcawl, Junction 37, and Margam, Junction 38. The motorway's closed in both directions, Shet East and westbound. There's a police incident queuing one side back to Baglan, the other side back to Bridgend. The A48, the diversion's queuing too, and slow southbound down the M1 toward Luton North at 11A. And earlier collisions cleared, all lanes open, still queues though, and that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
So the UK's most popular baby names have been revealed, with Noah and Olivia again topping the annual list. In at number 2 is Mohammed for boys. List is on the screen here. Number 3 for boys is George. Then it goes Olivia. Then it's Leo, Arthur, and so on. And for girls, so Olivia is number 1. Then Amelia, Isla, Ava, Lily, Ivy, Freya. There we go. Any of those names take your pick? Where's Dawn, by the way?
Well, yeah, there's on the Telegraph website, right, there's a really good way linked into this where you can actually put your name into the search engine, and these are names from 2022, by the way, and it tells you how common your name was. And I did put Dawn in. It's never been that popular. Can't think why. And there were only 5 babies named Dawn in 2022.
Really? That's surprising.
It's not a full confession here, right? My middle name, Mum, I hate you, is Maureen. Why is everyone laughing? My middle name is Maureen, which is a good old-fashioned East End name, and that has completely died out. There were no babies named Maureen.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Names like Keith, for example, Peter. Would you call a baby these days Keith or Ian? Baby Ian?
Without a doubt. I feel like I'm in a persecuted minority, you see, because later on, when I'm watching the boxing with Terry, Steve, Mick, Phil and Kev, right, and Peter, there are no such names featuring in this list. We are dying out. Our names will soon be gone forever, and I feel victimised by it.
Likewise, I should think we should start a campaign group and go on a protest march through London.
Cans, what do you make about Mohammed being number 2 for boys' names?
You know, I'm not going to comment on people. You know, they're going to call what they want to call. What I find interesting is people that do double barrel because they can't decide, and you know, a lot of people do that, and that's a bit difficult because I think you should just pick a name. You know.
I tell you names that are falling down the list though: Harry and Meghan.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:39. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, Sir Keir Starmer launched his party's general election campaign at the ground of Gillingham Football Club this morning and said that the upcoming election was a chance for the country to turn the page and rebuild Britain. And he also attacked the Conservatives' record on the economy and claimed that his party was in the service of working people. And meanwhile, launching his own general election campaign, Rishi Sunak took a swipe at his opponent, dubbing Keir Starmer a leader with no convictions. However, he did admit that flights to Rwanda would not take off until after the election. An astonishing admission. And I'm joined now by our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who is outside Downing Street. Catherine, welcome to the show. Another story that caught my cat I'd like to pull you on is reform. Specifically, Nigel Farage in this studio last night was saying he felt that Rishi Sunak's decision to go early in July had more than quite a lot to do with the growing threat of reform. And dramatically today, Catherine, Nigel has said that he won't be standing at the next general election. Tell us more.
Yes, well, one of many Tory MPs' nightmare scenarios was
a general election while the polls were still so terrible. And of course, that's what Rishi Sunak has decided to go. It's never happened before that a Prime Minister has called an election when so far behind in the polls when he didn't need to. But the other nightmare scenario has always been for the Conservative Party that Nigel Farage would come back to lead the Reform Party in the general election. Now, Reform were creeping up in the polls, and it was thought that if Nigel Farage came back, then they would go further. In fact, they could possibly have overtaken the Conservative Party in the polls. Now, that wouldn't have meant they'd have got many seats or potentially any seats, but it would have definitely meant that they would have cost the Conservative Party an awful lot of seats. Now, they still might, but of course, Nigel Farage has taken the decision, finally, that he is not going to do that. He is not going to stand. He is going to support the party of which he is head, but he's not going to be standing. He's not going to be leader. So I think that really will take the wind out of Reform's sails. Now, they had a press conference this morning. They say that they are standing in 630 out of 650 seats. That's nearly all of them. Richard Tice, the leader, is going to be standing in Boston and Skegness, which is the 15th safest seat, Conservative seat in the country. Matt Warman won that seat in 2019 with a whopping 61% of the vote. It's also one of the few constituencies in the country where people still take a positive view of Brexit. So we will see what happens there, but they voted leave by 75%. So I think, although Tory nerves are extremely frayed, although Tory MPs, many of them are very, very angry and bewildered, frankly, as to why Rishi Sunak has decided to go now, there will be a sigh of relief in CCHQ. Things could have been even worse.
OK, thank you very much, Catherine Forster. And let's see what that Reform Party vote share looks like without Nigel Farage, who now be heading over to join Donald Trump on the campaign trail in the USA. Catherine Forster, thank you very much for joining us, as ever. Now, coming up, as British children emerge from a new study as world leaders in laziness, which party will put our kids first? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. We're sticking with a bit of a north-south split in our weather as we go through the rest of this week, with northern parts staying pretty wet because of the low pressure centre that has brought so much rain recently lingering here. Further south, though, it's a different story. Some drier, brighter weather to end the day, and then we will have some clear skies across south-southeastern parts as we go overnight. Further north and elsewhere across the country, quite a cloudy picture, and there will be further outbreaks of rain. Some of them could be a little bit on the heavy side, could be some more flooding issues for some of us. Where we see the clear skies in the south, it may turn a little bit chilly overnight, but elsewhere, because of the cloudy, wet and for some blustery weather, it is going to be a relatively mild start to the day tomorrow. Taking a closer look first thing tomorrow morning, and across many parts of Scotland, quite a bit of cloud around, and there will still be some outbreaks of rain. Perhaps western parts of Scotland having some clearer skies, so it may be a little bit chilly first thing here. Otherwise, lots of cloud and outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland, Northern England and much of England and Wales. But further south, some brighter skies first thing. I mentioned that it could be a bit chilly first thing, but once the sun rises, those temperatures should start to climb quite quickly. As we go through the day tomorrow, it is going to be fairly similar to today, really. Across northern parts, further outbreaks of rain, though they don't look quite as heavy as today. Nonetheless, some heavier bursts are still possible. Always driest towards the south, a greater chance of seeing some sunshine here, but one or two showers could pop up. Temperatures for many look quite similar, perhaps starting to feel a bit warmer across northern parts compared to today. More showery rain across northern parts as we go through the evening tomorrow. None of it looks especially heavy, but some moderate bursts are possible. Clearer skies towards the south could take us into a bit of a chilly start on Saturday, but it definitely looks like the driest day of the long weekend before rain arrives through Sunday and Monday. Bye-bye.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:46. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, according to a new study published by the World Health Organization, British children are among the least active in the entire world as day-to-day exercise largely disappears from young people's lives, an astonishing admission. And the survey observed that the lives of children aged 11, 12 and 15 and showed that only 11% of girls and 16% of boys in England are doing the recommended 60 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the TV weight loss presenter, Steve Miller. Steve, always a delight to have you on the show. And once again, our collective jaws are on the desk about something we read about the nation getting fatter and fatter. Steve, young people especially, this is very, very concerning. What on earth is going on that so few boys and girls are getting exercise? Where does this begin? Is it at school? Is it at home? Help me make sense of this.
Well, I think it's a combination of things, but I don't blame the kids. I actually say to the parents, not all, because many parents do a damn good job and they get their backside off the sofa, go for a walk with them and play in the park. But we have too many parents in this country that would prefer to sit and eat pizza on the sofa and are not great role models to their kids. So it's all about parent power. You can't expect other people to be exercising your kids for you. It comes down to you as an individual. And I have always said, you know, that in this country, the problem is we've developed this culture where it's really cool to be fat, you know, love your curves, all of this sort of thing. That message is now being transferred, I should say, into the heads of children where it's kind of cool to be fat. So why should we bother? But the absolute number one issue here is parents not taking responsibility for their child's physical health. Yes, many do a good job, but unfortunately, too many don't. Now, also, it's a societal thing, a cultural thing, because in Japan, for example, the kids, they walk to school. In this country, it's not unusual to see someone, a mum, in a dressing gown, actually driving the child to school. You know, the mum has just opted out of bed and not even put the lippy on, and off she is in the slippers, driving the kids to school. And you know what? Some people may think, you for real? You look around you. You look around you. This is what this country's come to. And of course, we make excuses, don't we? Oh, there's not enough time in the day and all of this sort of thing. Britain loves excuses. The problem is excuses are very calorific and not good for your child's health. It's a culture thing.
Steve, I'm laughing away there because I actually do see that on my own school run. I see parents getting out of cars. One of them's got a onesie like a Frisian cow. Anyway, moving on. In terms of the league table of fat kids, Britain is below Romania, Poland, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, Norway and Croatia. And an astonishing thing, there seems to be quite a gender divide, particularly by age of 15, Steve. 43% of girls aged 15 are officially fat versus 29% of boys. See, I always thought it was the boys that were sitting down playing video games. Is this part of that thing you're talking about the celebration of fat culture via social media? And that's something particular that young women seem to be absorbing?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. You know, we have gone from the catwalk to the fat walk, so to speak. We you know, every time you want to talk about weight and how being fat is not good for us and being a fat parent is not good in terms of role modeling for your child, you get the squealers now in this country. Oh, you're fat shaming. How dare you? You should be cancelled. That's awful. When actually it's the other way round. Anyone endorsing fat, anyone endorsing their child to sit on computer games all night and pile on the pounds, they're the ones that should have a good look in the mirror at themselves. And frankly, you know, if you're not prepared to look after the health of your child, you shouldn't have them in the first place. Now, I just think that's common sense. But common sense seems to have sunk somewhere. It's been flushed away down the loo. It's just gone. Sometimes it amazes me. I just say common sense things, and then you get some of the angries on Twitter. Oh, he's fat shaming. You're terrible saying that. What? That I want people to live a decent life? God's sake.
And live a long time and prosper. Now, Steve, everybody, of course, knows you for your outspoken, excellent opinions on obesity. You're also a very political animal. You're incredibly passionate about politics. And today I noticed you got involved in a tweet that I put out asking the nation, has Nigel Farage betrayed Britain? Because, of course, he's going to America to get involved in Trump's campaign. He's not standing in Britain. Now, a lot of people, I predicted and I called quite some time ago, I always felt Nigel's destiny would be in America. You got involved in this, didn't you? And you said some pretty strong things. Do you think it's the wrong choice for Nigel to go to America and not stand and fight in Britain?
I'm fuming with him. And I'll tell you why. I feel like he's flirted with me as a potential voter of reform. I feel like he's flirted with me for a couple of years and he's ditched me. He's not taking me out on that date, so to speak. Nigel Farage is a decent man. I know that people say, oh, you know, all this racist allegation and the homophobic. He's not any of that. He's a decent man. More to the point, though, he's a charismatic leader who I thought loved Britain. But it seems that he loves America more than he loves Britain by what I'm hearing today. So I'm very, very disappointed. Richard Tice is a nice enough guy, but I'm afraid he's too beige as a leader, in my opinion. He just doesn't do it for me. So will I be, am I one of those people that was voting reform that's going to vote elsewhere? Absolutely. I shan't be voting reform now. Nigel's done that.
Wow. I'd like to read a few more comments out, if I could. I'd like to read out your says before the end of the show. Some people are very supportive. Rick says this, it's a strategically sound move. Nigel's efforts would be wasted in Britain. We need a younger generation to experience the misery and destruction caused by Labour in order to create the same opportunity here. Shazza says Nigel's given 25 years to his country and he's been rewarded with derision and hatred. He achieved more than any politician since Churchill. I respect his call to go to the USA. And on that point, Steve, is it worth saying that a lot of people believe that there's a huge, huge battle in some ways for the survival of the Western world in America? They say if Donald Trump gets in, there's a chance to fight wokery on the front line, and that will then filter down to Britain. Nigel might even get a job with Donald Trump. So thinking like that, do you think he's got a point? It's fair to hop over the Atlantic.
You think that if Donald Trump gets elected, which I'm not, I hope he is, but I'm not so sure he will be. You actually think that if Donald Trump gets elected, we'll suddenly eliminate wokery in this country when we've got Keir Starmer as the Prime Minister? No, that's not going to happen. Wokery will deepen in this country. Wokery will deepen under Labour, without a doubt, without shadow of a doubt. I will have that many pronouns. Honestly, I shall have every letter coming out the back of my name. It's just crazy. No, I don't. I am very disappointed Nigel's going. I like him. He's a talented guy. He's charismatic, all of those good things. And I do wish him well, but I'm really annoyed with him.
OK, Steve Miller, always enjoy your company. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll have loads on this story after the break. It's an election special. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. But it's your weather now, and it's Alex Burkill.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. We're sticking with a bit of a north-south split in our weather as we go through the rest of this week, with northern parts staying pretty wet because of the low-pressure centre that has brought so much rain recently lingering here. Further south, though, it's a different story. Some drier, brighter weather to end the day, and then we will have some clear skies across south-southeastern parts as we go overnight. Further north and elsewhere across the country, quite a cloudy period picture, and there will be further outbreaks of rain. Some of them could be a little bit on the heavy side, could be some more flooding issues for some of us. Where we see the clear skies in the south, it may turn a little bit chilly overnight, but elsewhere, because of the cloudy, wet and for some blustery weather, it is going to be a relatively mild start to the day tomorrow. Taking a closer look first thing tomorrow morning, and across many parts of Scotland, quite a bit of cloud around, and there will still be some outbreaks of rain. Perhaps western parts of Scotland having some clearer skies, so it may be a little bit chilly first thing here. Otherwise, lots of cloud and outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland, Northern England and much of England and Wales. But further south, some brighter skies first thing. I mentioned that it could be a bit chilly first thing, but once the sun rises, those temperatures should start to climb quite quickly. As we go through the day tomorrow, it is going to be fairly similar to today, really. Across northern parts, further outbreaks of rain, though they don't look quite as heavy as today. Nonetheless, some heavier bursts are still possible. Always driest towards the south, a greater chance of seeing some sunshine here, but 1 or 2 showers could pop up. Temperatures for many look quite similar, perhaps starting to feel a bit warmer across northern parts compared to today. More showery rain across northern parts as we go through the evening tomorrow. None of it looks especially heavy, but some moderate bursts are possible. Clearer skies towards the south could take us into a bit of a chilly start on Saturday, but it definitely looks like the driest day of the long weekend before rain arrives through Sunday and Monday. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. A 3-mile queue clockwise for the M60 at Barton Junction 11. A lane shut and obstruction there causing queues back to Carrington Junction 8. South Wales, the M4 closed both sides between Pyle and Porthcawl Junction 37 and Margam 38. Big queues for well over an hour. It's because of a police incident. The A48, the diversion, that's absolutely solid around Margam and around Pyle as well. Northbound M5 northwest of Bristol at the M4918, the entry slip road part blocked and queuing. That's due to a collision. And there's various queues anti-clock on the M25. 2 lanes shut after junction 16, a collision being recovered. It's also blocked before Heathrow at 14. That's queuing back to junction 16. A collision there is causing queues. Opposite side slow back to Staines at 13. That's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Oh my God, are you joking? Not a wine, what is it? I never won a penny in my life. I don't know what to say.
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, it shocks me. This is amazing.
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Election latest, yes, the date has been set. July the 4th is when the nation will decide. We'll be live from the four corners of the United Kingdom to find out what that might mean for Britain. Plus, could there be a dramatic last-minute coup to try and remove Rishi Sunak from office? Big question of the day, has Nigel Farage betrayed Britain? Because he's dramatically announced he will not stand for Reform UK and instead will head to the USA to help Donald Trump get elected there. Is that the right thing to do? Or actually, should Nigel have stayed and fought at Britain? That's the big debate we've got coming up in this hour. Next story, net migration to the UK has dropped by 10%, but that's from a staggering high of 764,000. But immigration is still more than the size of Nottingham and Newcastle combined in 1 year alone. And that's 3 times the total of 2019 when they promised they would take back control. Will we ever do that? And unfit and fat to shock new polls reveal that British kids are amongst the laziest in the world. A mere 11% of girls are getting regular exercise and 43% are fat. What can we do all about bloated British bands? That's all coming in your next hour. Well, it's a show, always a delight to have your company. So it's the afternoon after the afternoon before. The dust is settling on that dramatic announcement. In the rain, things could only get wetter. People mocked of Rishi Sunak as he stood there in the drizzle with things going to get better, blasting out down Downing Street. Now the battle lines are drawn. That shock announcement today by Nigel Farage this morning that he won't be standing and instead will be going to America to help Donald Trump. That's really, really got you talking. That's our big debate this hour. I've already had over 1,000 comments on this. Has Nigel done the right thing by going to America, or should he have stayed here to help save Britain? Send your views quickly and I'll get some read out. gbnews.com/your say. But before all of that, it's your headlines and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 4. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says voters should back him if they want the Rwanda deportation scheme to succeed, but concedes flights won't get off the ground before the general election. Rishi Sunak also says he's putting the economy and global security at the heart of his campaign. It comes as political party leaders begin 6 weeks of trying to win votes after it was announced polls would open on the 4th of July. The timing of the announcement came as a surprise to some, with Labour polling 20 points ahead. Kicking off the Conservatives' campaign this morning, Rishi Sunak claimed Labour would do absolutely nothing to stop the boats.
Everyone else is starting to agree with my approach, which is bold. The one person that doesn't is Keir Starmer. That's a choice at this election. He thinks that we should just offer an amnesty to illegal migrants to make us a soft touch of Europe. It would make us a magnet for thousands of migrants coming from everywhere. So that's the choice at this election. Do you think my plan is the right one? Do you think I'm the one that's taking bold action to secure our borders and to stop the boats? Or do you think he's going to do that? And it's pretty clear that on this issue, not only does he not share the country's values that it's a problem, he's going to do absolutely nothing about it.
And starting his election campaign in southeast England, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says that what the Conservatives have done to the country is unforgivable and voters don't need to put up with it.
Rishi Sunak clearly does not believe in his Rwanda plan. I think that's been clear from this morning because he's not going to get any flights off. I think that tells its own story. I don't think he's ever believed that plan is going to work, and so he's called an election early enough to have it not tested before the election. We have to deal with the terrible loss of control of the border under this government. We have to tackle these small boats that are coming across. Nobody should be making that journey.
Meanwhile, Lib Dems leader Sir Ed Davey says the Conservatives are out of touch.
For far too long, people across the United Kingdom have been let down and taken for granted by this Conservative government and this out-of-touch Conservative party. But with this election, we have the chance to win the change our country so desperately needs.
In Scotland, First Minister John Swinney says most voters want to see the back of what he called the disastrous Conservative government.
Never has a government deserved to lose more than Rishi Sunak's government. You want higher living standards and a fairer country where everyone can lead secure, happy, healthy lives. You want a national health service you can rely upon. Most of you think that Brexit was a terrible mistake. You don't think Westminster works for Scotland, and you want Scotland to have a strong voice. All of those things sum up what I am about.
In other news, a 64-year-old man has been charged with assisting the Russian intelligence service. Howard Phillips has been remanded in custody after counter-terrorism investigation into suspected offences under the National Security Act. He's expected to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court later this afternoon. A man has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years for a series of attacks in South London. Mohammed Noor targeted strangers and used a makeshift blade to kill Yonita Dogbey in Brixton in May last year. She was attacked from behind while walking alone during the day. Noor cut her throat and she died at the scene. The 34-year-old was also found guilty of 3 other slash attacks 2 days before her death. And a record more than 68,500 people were granted refugee status or other types of leave to remain in the year to March. Home Office figures show that's the highest number of any 12-month period since records began. Meanwhile, the total asylum backlog still stands at more than 100,000. The family of a 10-year-old who died in a mudslide in North Yorkshire say she was happy, bubbly and a happy-go-lucky girl. Primary school student Leah Harrison was killed yesterday afternoon after getting into difficulty near Carlton Bank. It's understood she was on a school trip at the time. Mount Pleasant Primary School say the incident is a heartbreaking tragedy and Leah was a much-loved part of the community. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, campaigning is very much underway as both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer begin hitting the campaign trail and laying out their visions for the future of the country. The Prime Minister was in Derbyshire this morning and sought to draw dividing lines on evergreen issues such as the economy and immigration. He said that he called the election because economic stability had returned, but admitted, astonishingly, that flights to Rwanda would not take off before the election. And meanwhile, the Labour leader attacked the Conservatives' record on the economy and claimed the Prime Minister has never believed in his own Rwanda scheme. Well, our political correspondent Catherine Forster is outside Downing Street. Catherine, welcome to the show. Let's start with that astonishing admission. The morning after, calling a snap election, the key policy of getting those flights off the ground, stopping the boats via this deterrent, won't happen anyway.
Yes, incredible, isn't it, Martin? I mean, when Rishi Sunak made those 5 pledges a year and a half ago, people said, oh, is that it? They're not very ambitious. And the original thinking was that they would fulfill them and then they'd give 5 more pledges. But those pledges have proved incredibly difficult. Yes, they've pretty much got back inflation almost to 2%. That's a big achievement. And of course, that was the news yesterday. Rishi Sunak came along and called an election off the back of it. But the most intractable one of all, of course, was stopping the boats. Now, it was only on Tuesday morning in Vienna that he said to me that there would be regular flights taking off to Rwanda from July, but now there has been a condition attached to that, and it is a monumentally big condition. The condition is if I win the next election. Now, given that the Conservatives are 20 points behind in the polls, that is looking very possible that not a single flight will take off, because Sir Keir Starmer has explicitly said that if Labour come to power, they will scrap the Rwanda scheme straight away. They say they don't believe in it. They say that the Prime Minister doesn't believe in it either, and this is why he's gone now, because it's destined to fail, they say. We may never find out. It's quite astonishing, isn't it? Hundreds of £1 million committed to Rwanda. A number of Home Secretaries have gone. Only one illegal migrant has gone, and that is somebody that chose voluntarily to go. Now, Rishi Sunak is saying, stick with me, safer with the Conservatives, better the devil, you know. We're turning the economy round. Look what we've done with inflation. Things are beginning to change. Stick with the plan. We're going to hear it again and again and again. He's telling us we can stop the boats if you just stick with me. But the problem is, of course, we haven't seen it. Are people going to believe that if they vote Conservative, those boats are stopping?
Astonishing stuff. And all those promises he made to you in Vienna, obviously, this means nothing to me. That's a joke older viewers might get. Catherine Forster, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Always a delight. She didn't get it. Now, moving on quickly, let's join to GB News' Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, thank you very much for joining us. So the Scottish aren't happy at all about the timing of the election. The SNP have been moaning. Nothing new there, of course. But tell us, why is July the 4th a problem for the Scottish electorate?
Good afternoon, Martin. Good to speak to you. So, yeah, July 4th, you know, it is actually within about the first week of the school summer holidays up here in Scotland. And of course, it's not just MPs who are potentially looking to work around holiday plans, but now a lot of people will be looking to the postal vote service, perhaps something they've not done before, because many families like to get away here in Scotland before the English schools go away and fill up all those beautiful resorts around the world. But that's not to say that, you know, it's all one-sided. I think there's a lot being said, more tongue-in-cheek than anything today, that of course this election is going to get called on the 4th of July, Independence Day. I honestly, I think it beggars belief up here that such a gift would be given to John Swinney and the SNP. John Swinney, of course, just a month back into top flight politics. He was explaining at the SNP campaign launch earlier today, and just 2 weeks into the top job, and already he's facing not just his first election test, his first real test. And indeed, as we heard a little earlier through the bulletins there, you know, he says that whilst Labour and the Conservatives are going to go hammer and tongs against each other, he's going to go hammer and tongs for Scotland, go straight to the end of the line for the Scottish people. But of course, you know, it's quite an unenviable position that John Swinney is in. You know, he built up his career in the early 2000s as, you know, a gradualist towards independence, but now there's the full weight of the membership in him to use this golden opportunity to push for independence, and he's doing that by showing the success of many of the powers that have been devolved to Scotland, and the power that is done in successful decision making, according to the SNP, of what happens when decisions for Scotland are made in Scotland. And I think that is going to form the framework so that he doesn't have to perhaps directly talk quite so much about independence, because when he was put into the top spot, he said that he would be the First Minister for all of Scotland. And actually, as we've seen time and time again, most of Scotland, they don't support independence. So it'll be really interesting to see how he juggles them. And of course, you know, we are going to see, we saw a campaign launch from Scottish Labour earlier today in Leith, as well as, I believe, a visit from Rishi Sunak later on. So definitely day one, I can't believe it, but here we are up here in Scotland, all to play for.
Thank you very much for that update. Tony Maguire. I'm joined in the studio by the Deputy Political Editor at the Financial Times, Jim Pickard. Jim, always a delight to have your company. You were nodding away in the previous talk there with Catherine Forster about getting those flights off the ground to Rwanda, but you think Rishi might have an ace up his sleeve.
So I was very surprised when I heard him say this morning that this isn't going to happen before the general election, but the preparations are there. I do wonder whether this is a bit of expectation management, and we'll get to the start of July and they will have that first flight taking off to Rwanda, and the photographs will be all over the TV screens, all over the newspapers, and Rishi Sunak can point to it and say, see, we are actively doing this, and you, the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats, don't have any plans of this kind.
And that would be one rabbit out of the hat. I was speaking to Sir John Curtis, of course, the legendary pollster, earlier. He said, looking at the metrics, looking at the data, this is more or less, it's going to take a miracle for Rishi to win. That Rwanda could be one way of getting the flights up dramatically. Another thing that caught my eye, Jim, is the Tories have thrown the gauntlet down to Sir Keir Starmer and challenged him to 6 TV debates, 6 live debates, 1 per week for the next 6 weeks. Why do you think they're doing that?
So I don't think that Keir Starmer will say yes to the offer of a debate every week. I think Starmer will probably settle somewhere in the middle, like maybe one BBC debate, one ITV debate. And I think that the theory among the Conservatives is that Rishi Sunak is younger, slimmer, more dynamic, possibly a little bit quicker in debates. When you watch him at Prime Minister's questions, he has been pretty good in recent months. I would say, of course, Labour believes that they have stronger arguments, not least that the Conservatives have been in power for 14 years and a lot of things have gone wrong. But I do think that the Conservatives think they've seen these two against each other in PMQs. Rishi Sunak sometimes does better Keir Starmer, and therefore the more airtime they get of them going head-to-head, the better from their perspective.
And those TV debates do have a big impact. No, remember, Nick Clegg came from nowhere. Clegg-mania, and sort of swept across the nation just because we'd never really heard from this fella before. And actually, Sir John Curtis was saying, looking back to the 2017 election, when Jeremy Corbyn came from nowhere, 20 points behind, to get a hung parliament. That was because nobody'd really seen him perform. So do you think they may be relying on the theatre of a live debate of an area where Rishi Sunak could excel?
Absolutely. I mean, most people don't pay massively close attention to politics. They might be partially interested in politics or they follow certain political stories, but they're not analysing in the sort of depth that the Westminster bubble does. And when you look at these polls of who can recognise members of the Cabinet and the shadow Cabinet, it's pretty low. And therefore, the short campaign of a general election is the period when you can really see these people up close and people are listening more attentively because the stakes are an awful lot higher. Now, I agree with John Curtis that it's almost impossible to see a route for Rishi Sunak to remain Prime Minister. That doesn't mean that I think that Labour is going to walk to a landslide victory. I think there are all sorts of scenarios that could play out in the next 6 weeks whereby Keir Starmer still becomes Prime Minister, but he doesn't necessarily have the massive room for manoeuvre in the House of Commons that Boris Johnson had in 2019.
Could I ask you, Jim, about Nigel Farage? Obviously, this early election, he was in this studio last night saying that was more than a little to do with the fact to try and neutralise the threat of reform. He's now said this morning he's going to go to America and not stand and fight, at least as a candidate, in Britain. Do you think the Conservatives will be happy? They seem to have put that threat to one side. Do you think Nigel's doing the right thing?
So Nigel Farage has tried to become an MP 7 times. He's failed to become an MP in 5 general elections. He's failed in 2 by-elections. So, there's a matter of pride there. When you're Nigel Farage and you are probably one of the most influential politicians in Britain of the last 30 years, it's got to be a bit humbling to stand on that podium and not be elected as an MP. And there's issues in terms of whether he could continue his broadcast career if he did stand. I think what happens with reform is going to be really important to this because where are they now in the polls? About 11% or something. That is a big chunk of votes, of which an awful lot of them are coming from the Conservative Party. If they can suppress reform down to 5 or 6%, then their chances of holding Labour at bay and preventing them getting a big majority, possibly even pushing them into a hung parliament, it seems a little less remote. And so they'll be praying that reform struggles to put forward candidates everywhere. They'll be praying that some of those candidates turn out to be a little bit controversial, as has happened in the past. And they'll be praying that the reform vote goes down. But what we've seen over the last year is reform getting more and more popular. So it could be wishful thinking again.
Jim Pickard, excellent, as always, to have you in the studio. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have drawn swords over tackling illegal migration ahead of the 4th of July general election. The Prime Minister admitted earlier today that the first flights to Rwanda will not take off before the election, as we were just discussing, with the Labour leader, however, slamming the government's plan and vow to clean up the migration mess of the past 14 years of Tory leadership. Well, with us now is GB News' Homeland Security Editor Mark White. Mark, welcome back to the show. Now, in the last hour, we talked about illegal migration and this astonishing admission that we might not even get any flights off the ground to Rwanda. Can we now focus on legal migration? The net figures were out this morning. There's been a 10.3% drop. But Mog, a drop from a very high ceiling is hardly reason to get the champagne out.
Well, it's true, but those figures are going in the right direction as far as the government is concerned. They have a long way to go, and there are multiple reasons behind those historically high figures. Of course, there is what's happening in the economy and the move to drive ever greater numbers of migrants into jobs here in the UK. But remember as well, you've had years in which the number of people coming from places like Ukraine, Hong Kong and Afghanistan have pushed up net migration figures. And you've had this massive push by the university sector in the UK, which relies really as part of its business model on pushing ever greater numbers of people from overseas into the university system here in the UK to ensure that that business model is a success. Now, they have suffered a bit of a significant blow in terms of the government policy of late, government policy which has not been factored in to the latest Office of National Statistics figures, because those figures take you up to the end of December last year. And then in January this year, the policies have come through from the government, particularly when we're looking at students, policies that ensure that in the vast majority of cases, students will no longer be able to take their dependents through. And that has already resulted in a 79% fall in the number of visa applications for dependents of students. There's a similar system that's come into place for healthcare workers' dependents, and that again has resulted in a 58% drop, and indeed also of the dependents, and also a significant drop in the number of people coming across or applying for visas to come across as healthcare workers. So all of these issues are going to work their way through in the system, but we're not seeing that as far as the Office for National Statistics figures are concerned, because there's a 4-month lag that doesn't take into account the first 4 months of this year.
And also, Mark White, it's worth pointing out that total, that net total of 685,000, that's still more than the combined total in 1 year of my home city of Nottingham and Newcastle. Thank you very much, Mark White. Always a delight to have you on the show. Now, coming up, has Nigel Farage betrayed Britain by not standing at the next general election? We'll have a live, fighty debate right here in the studio. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Apparently alcohol abuse is costing England £27 billion a year. I mean, in fairness, that's the price of 2 rounds in London, Nicholas.
Yeah, tell me about it. Not that I'm a big consumer of alcohol, I'm very Mediterranean in my consumption, but revealed alcohol abuse costs soar to £27 billion a year. So this cost basically encompasses a variety of aspects, from health-related problems, so the cost on the NHS, lack of productivity, people who lose their jobs, social services, and all that. And of course, it has been on the rise, 37% more compared to last time this was studied in 2003. So now Institute of Alcohol Studies and some other groups are pushing or asking for tougher taxes and tougher regulation. But is that the solution? Like in ancient Rome, they said, in medium stat virtus, like moderation, virtue is in moderation. And again, if they're going to raise the price, people like myself or yourself who are moderate consumers, pardon?
You're going to turn to heroin. Because it'll become... I mean, well, this is what's happened in Scotland.
It becomes unaffordable, so...
Yeah, in Scotland, they had minimum unit alcohol pricing, and so it pushes up the cost of getting off your tree for your average Scottish ne'er-do-well who likes to sit in a bus stop and drink a bottle of cider. So instead, they're turning to street drugs, which are cheaper by comparison.
That is just terrible. I like that the alcohol industry have come back on this. A guy called Matt Lambert, who's the chief executive of the Portman Group, and they represent the alcohol industry. And he says that the IAS, that's the group who've created this, have failed to take into account the significant direct economic contribution of the alcohol industry to the wider economic and social benefits of moderate and responsible alcohol consumption. Well, it's so true, isn't it? We've got a declining birth rate. We need people to get drunk and chat each other up.
Yeah.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:26. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now, as Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer get their election campaigns underway, the honorary presidents of Reform UK and GB News presenter Nigel Farage has dramatically announced that he will not be standing in the upcoming general election. And whilst the announcement would likely come as a relief to Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party, many voters will be disappointed that the former UKIP gaffer will be focusing his efforts instead on helping Donald Trump win the US presidential election. So the topic of today's debate: has Nigel Farage betrayed Britain, or has he done the right thing? To debate this, I'm joined by political commentators Emma Webb and Matthew Stadlen. Welcome to you both. Emma, let's start with you, if we could. Has Nigel done the right thing, or should he have stayed and fought on British soil?
Look, I think many of us would have liked to have seen Nigel run, but ultimately his decision makes plenty of sense. And I don't think it makes sense for the reason that many people have said, that, you know, if he runs, he's unlikely to get a seat, that he's ran so many times before and not become an MP. I think clearly Nigel Farage's power lies outside of the sort of muck of politics. He's been the most successful politician of a generation without ever having held the office of a Member of Parliament. And I think he's right that there is global significance to the election in the United States. So I don't think it's particularly surprising, but of course it's a huge blow to the Reform Party. It does make it slightly more likely that the Conservative Party will be able to at least maybe achieve a hung parliament. So it's good news for Rishi Sunak, but I think it's a perfectly understandable decision from Nigel's point of view.
OK, Matthew Stadlen, before we come to you, I'm afraid we have to quickly cut to our political editor, Christopher Hope. He's in the Scottish Highlands. Chris, are you there with the Prime Minister? So we haven't got an internet connection. So let's stick with Matthew Stadlen. Matthew Stadlen, so presumably, I mean, you're no fan of Nigel Farage. Are you happy that he's going to America?
I mean, Nigel and I get on perfectly well in person, but I certainly don't share any of his politics. I think some of the things he's said over the years are reprehensible. However, and this is a bizarre position for me to find myself in, defending Nigel Farage, but if you are on the other side of politics to me, if you are on the sort of harder right side of things, and indeed if you are a sort of moderate Brexiter, a moderate Brexit voter, the idea that he somehow betrayed the country, it seems to me to be peculiar and for the birds. He's done a huge amount for your cause. If you were someone who wanted Brexit, I doubt Brexit would have happened had it not been for Farage's campaigning, his relentless campaigning for year after year after year. It was that, remember, that sort of almost forced David Cameron, or made David Cameron feel that he was forced to call that in-out referendum. Why do I think Farage it doesn't seem to be up for this particular fight? I think perhaps because he didn't want to lose but he didn't want to win. Now, he's lost 7 times and he's been widely mocked for that. To lose an 8th time would have further damaged his credibility and his ego in that context of parliamentary elections. But I'm not convinced that he wanted to win either, because I think he's probably quite happy doing what he's doing at the moment, fronting GB News shows.
Emma, and I've got a quick comment here to read out from one of our punters. There's over 1,000 comments on this. It's really got people going. Margaret says this: I can't tell you how disappointed myself and friends are that Nigel would not be standing for reform in the election. He would have got millions of votes. Here's the people's choice. What do you say to that? A lot of people have anticipated, they've been waiting for Nigel to return, they've been waiting for that big clarion call, that blowing of the bugle, and now they feel a bit disappointed.
Well, certainly I think there are lots of people who will feel that this was the golden opportunity, that the moment had finally arrived. But ultimately, Reform are not going to win the next general election. They might steal votes away from the Conservatives. They might act as a kingmaker. Frankly, I think, and with respect to your previous segment on this, that it would be sensible for the Reform Party to not stand candidates against sound Conservative MPs, but only to stand against those sort of Tory wets, to use the pun of Rishi being soaked outside of Parliament, but outside of Downing Street even. But I think, ultimately, I disagree with Matthew. I don't think that this is about ego. I think that Nigel knows what he's doing. And even if there are people who are disappointed that he's chosen not to run, and maybe he would have been Reform's only MP.
Emma, I'm afraid I do have to interrupt you now, because we can cross live to the Scottish Highlands and with our political editor, Chris Hope. He's with the Prime Minister. Chris.
Yeah, Martin, hi. Can you hear and you see me now? I'm on the bus here with the Prime Minister's party going to the Scottish Highlands. We have been so far to Derby, we've been to Wales, we've been to seats in Derby, Erewash, held by Maggie Throop with a 10,000 vote majority in 2019. That shows an indication of how the campaign is starting. Then on now we're in the Scottish Highlands in a to the next engagement. When I get there, I'll be able to tell you what.
I'm afraid, Chris, I think we're going to have to pull out because we simply can't get an internet connection. Let's have a quick blast with Matthew Stadlen, who's still in the studio, patiently waiting to have your final say on Nigel Farage. Do you think there's something in this, Matthew, that the bigger battle is to go to America and fight woke?
No, well, I think you know my answer to that. No, I do not. I was surprised, by the way, that Ben Habib seemed to go in quite hard on Nigel Farage today, talking about the need for a leader who's prepared to stay the course. I suspect, I don't know, I haven't spoken to either of them in recent days, but I suspect that both Ben Habib and Richard Tice will be disappointed, actually, that Nigel Farage is not joining the battle lines. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Richard Tice would have been happy to hand over the leadership in the build-up to an autumn election to Farage. And indeed, there's been speculation that one of the reasons that Sunak went earlier than many, if not all of us, anticipated was because of the fear of Farage coming back. So if we look at this, if we pan out and look at this in the big picture, this is unquestionably really good news, or relatively good news in a bleak picture, for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives, because although Nigel Farage might well have lost the seat that he might have run in himself, he's a fantastically effective campaigner, and to have had him spearheading the Reform campaign could have been even more destructive than I think Reform risks being for the Tories as things stand.
Well, we have to leave it there. Emma and Matthew, thank you very much, and make a note of the date when Matthew Stadlen was very nice about Nigel Farage. Now let's move on quickly. It's your latest news headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. From the GB Newsroom at 4:33, your headlines. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused the Prime Minister of never believing his own Rwanda plan. It's after Rishi Sunak admitted flights carrying migrants will not take off before the general election in July. However, speaking as he started his election campaign in Derbyshire, the Conservative leader says the scheme will continue if he's re-elected. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage has confirmed he won't be standing as a candidate, but will help the Reform UK campaign. A 64-year-old man has been charged with assisting the Russian intelligence service Howard Phillips has been remanded in custody after a counter-terrorism investigation into suspected offences under the National Security Act. He's expected to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court later this afternoon. Mohammed Noor has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years for a series of attacks targeting strangers in South London. He was convicted of the murder of Yohanita Kasiwa Daubney, whose throat was cut with a makeshift blade in Brixton in May last year. Noor was also found guilty of 3 other attacks 2 days before her death. And a record of more than 68,500 people were granted refugee status or other types of leave to remain in the year to March. Home Office figures show that's the highest number of any 12-month period since records began. Meanwhile, the total asylum backlog still stands at more than 100,000. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. A 3-mile queue on the clockwise M60, a lane shut at Barton Junction 11, queuing back to Carrington at 8, an obstruction on the carriageway. Mixed fortunes for the M4 in South Wales. Westbound has reopened, albeit just one lane after Pyle and Porthcawl 37. Eastbound still closed at Margam 38. Massive queues on surrounding routes, not least the A48, for a previous police incident. Now, Bristol northbound M5 around the M49-18 at the end of the slip road from the Avonmouth Spur. The entry slips part blocked and queuing. There's been a collision. Northbound M3 Lightwater at 3 up to the M25 at 2, part blocked and slow. It's due to a collision, a lane shut, and the anti-clockwise M25 blocked before Heathrow 14, queuing back to 16 for a collision there. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Well, we're delighted about this because the boss of JD Wetherspoon has credited demand for fashionable Guinness as the pub chain reported a jump in sales.
Now, Guinness has benefited from a boom in demand over recent years, shaking off its association with rugby lads and old men to appeal to a much younger audience and loads more women.
We've got our Guinness here.
Oh, yeah.
Cheers to you.
Cheers.
I'm not sure about this boozing on air at this time of the morning, but I'll let you off on this occasion.
As it's you, Tim, as it's you. Now, Guinness is an acquired taste for many people, so I'm surprised it's become so popular.
Yes, it is a real surprise. I think it's always been a popular drink among the demographic you mentioned, the older guy. There's about 80 or 90% of pub trade over the last 30 or 40 years, and probably longer, are a similar range of products. But there's a varying 10, 20% according to fashion. You had vodka Red Bull 20 years ago. You had an Irish cider poured over ice, which came from no one knows where. You had Alco Pops. So there's an unpredictable range of products which have been the fashion of the moment. But the fashion of the moment, very unpredictably this time, is Guinness. And no one knows why. As you say, it's an acquired taste. Young people tend not to like it. Most of the fashionable drinks over the decades have been quite sweet. And Guinness obviously isn't. So, yes, I think the Guinness brewery, St James's Gate in Dublin, they'll say it's brilliant marketing. But like the rest of us, they rely a bit on luck.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:38. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, third time lucky. Let's cross now to our political editor, Chris Hope, who's travelling with the Prime Minister near Inverness on the Conservative Party battle bus. Chris, what's the latest?
That's right, Martin. I hope you can hear me now. And apologies for the signal earlier. Yeah, I'm on the battle bus here near Inverness. It's quite clear to me, I think, that while there are a lot in the Tory party who are concerned about this early election caused by Rishi Sunak when the party is so far behind in the polls, If you look at what's happening here, the effect has been almost to push Nigel Farage out of the race, and that might benefit the Tory party. I'm looking at polls for the weekend. I reckon there could be a few points shift towards the Tory party to give the PM, Rishi Sunak, a result on his early election. He's used that element of surprise that the Prime Minister can have to almost to push off, to kill off the threat of Nigel Farage, which few Tory leaders have been able to do. So an early win on day one of this election for Rishi Sunak.
But Chris, there's also been an early gaffe or an early admission anyhow this morning, and it seems that your pint of beer, your bet is safe. Rishi seems to admit not a single flight will take off before the general election to Rwanda.
That's right. So the PM started the day in Derby, near Nottingham, your neck of the woods, Martin. He said there the flights will take off in July. The airports are booked, the flights are booked, but he wouldn't say they'd take off before the 4th of July, which is very early in the month. So yes, my pint of beer that we did bet with the PM notionally is now safe. He's been interesting to see where he's visiting. He was in Maggie Throop's seat, Earwash, with a 10,000 majority from 2019. That shows the scale of the defensive crouch the Tory campaign is in at the beginning of this campaign. It's going to a seat held with a 10,000 majority in 2019. He went on to the Vale of Glamorgan seat, Alan Cairns' seat, held with 3,500 back in 2019. So it's more of a marginal seat just now. Now, I'll say we're in Inverness in the Scottish Highlands looking for another visit coming up shortly, live on GB News. But the PM is doing a 4-nation tour of the UK. He's been to, so far, England, Wales, we're now in Scotland and more. So he's trying to show he's hitting the ground running. He's trying to put Labour on the back foot and show that he has made, as I say, an early win by shoring up that vote on the right. Now, I can understand Richard Tice would say, well, I'm still here. We are standing seats in 630 seats candidates across the country. So far, though, he's selected just over 500, so more being selected as we speak. But it is now clearer to those on the right that if you want to get Labour out, you maybe need to vote Tory, because the hope of Nigel Farage shaking up politics has for now gone away.
OK, thank you very much for that. Live updates from the battle bus of the Prime Minister, Chris Hope, near Inverness in Scotland. Thank you very much. Now, moving on, the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, has said that it was humbling to discover her Nigerian roots. But now she's also discovered some ancestry in Europe too, because according to records, her great-grandmother, Mary Bird, was born in Malta in the middle of the 19th century. So she's 43% Nigerian, with also having roots in Malta. Well, join me now to discuss this is the royal correspondent and writer Michael Cole. Michael, so this seems to be turning into something of a global DNA tour, a diversity tour. You've heard of the Maltese falcon. Now we've got the Maltese Meghan.
Well, Martin, you've hit the nail on the head. Meghan Markle's Maltese connection is as elusive and illusionary as the Maltese falcon in that famous 1940s Hollywood noir film. The ancestry is really quite simple, and it's quite interesting. There was an English soldier called Thomas Bird. He was based in the garrison in Dublin. He met a girl from Belfast called Mary McCook, and he was then based to Malta, and she went with him, where they had a daughter called Mary Bird. And when little Mary Bird was 4 years old, the garrison, the regiment, the Cheshire Regiment in which he was in, were based and sent to Canada, to New Brunswick. There, unfortunately, Soldier Bird died, and Mrs. Bird, with her young daughter, married another man, and they moved to America. And from then on, the great story of Meghan Markle continued. So perhaps the islands, the 3 islands of Malta, will be pleased or relieved, we can't tell, to know that there is absolutely no Maltese antecedents with Meghan Markle, not a bit of it. It's another one, it's another piece of the puzzle, the wonderful story of Meghan Markle. But Maltese connection, there is none.
Yeah, well, maybe she's made the Maltese cross. Let's move on to another story that's caught my eye today, Michael. And this, how should we put it, this obscure portrait of the Princess Kate on the cover of Tatler magazine by a Zambian artist, Hannah Uzer. It's drawn some pretty unflattering reviews. The Telegraph said there, its jaw hits the floor bad. There it is on your screen there. Now, Michael, I think my daughter could do better than that, and she's no Monet. She's only 10.
It's dreadful, isn't it? It's as dreadful as Jonathan Yeo's red portrait of the Red King was brilliant and wonderful. It is really a daub, a most dreadful daub. And what Tatler's doing, sticking it on the cover, I have no idea at all. I think she's got the garter sash right. Everything else is wrong. Certainly the features, certainly the deportment, everything about it. I have no idea why on earth that would be put on the cover of such a long-established, well, it's the Toff's Bible, isn't it, Tatler? I don't know what they'll think of it at all. And I don't think it's helpful either, because at this moment, as we know, Kate, the Princess of Wales, is undergoing a treatment for an unspecified cancer. To have a picture of her, which might have been done by that man who did the Scream. I forget his name now, that Norwegian. Everybody knows that. Munch, that's right. Munch. I remember dear old Barry Humphries having great fun with that. Mr. Munch might have done this if he'd thought of doing a portrait of the Princess of Wales. No, I think it's best forgotten. I think it's one of those magazines you just want to turn it over and see the advert on the back page.
Yeah, and it says, again in that Telegraph review, that the artistic interpretation of Kate holds herself with the bored bearing of an air stewardess about to begin an in-flight safety demonstration. Michael, I can't say it any fairer than that. It's always a delight to have your company on the show. You stay safe out there, Michael Cole. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Now, coming up, as St Albans is set to become the first smartphone-free city for children under 14, are they onto a cracking idea? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. We're sticking with a bit of a north-south split in our weather as we go through the rest of this week, with northern parts staying pretty wet because of the low pressure centre that has brought so much rain recently lingering here. Further south though, it's a different story. Some drier, brighter weather to end the day, and then we will have some clear skies across south-southeastern parts as we go overnight. Further north and elsewhere across the country, quite a cloudy picture, and there will be further outbreaks of rain. Some of them could be a little bit on the heavy side, could be some more flooding issues for some of us. Where we see the clear skies in the south, it may turn a little bit chilly overnight, but elsewhere, because of the cloudy, wet and for some blustery weather, it is going to be a relatively mild start to the day tomorrow. Taking a closer look first thing tomorrow morning, and across many parts of Scotland, quite a bit of cloud around, and there will still be some outbreaks of rain, perhaps western parts of Scotland having some clearer skies, so it may be a little bit chilly first thing here. Otherwise, lots of cloud and outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland, Northern England and much of England and Wales, but further south, some brighter skies first thing. I mentioned that it could be a bit chilly first thing, but once the sun rises, those temperatures should start to climb quite quickly. As we go through the day tomorrow, it is going to be fairly similar to today, really. Across northern parts, further outbreaks of rain, though they don't look quite as heavy as today. Nonetheless, some heavier bursts are still possible. Always driest towards the south, a greater chance of seeing some sunshine here, but one or two showers could pop up. Temperatures for many look quite similar, perhaps starting to feel a bit warmer across northern parts compared to today. More showery rain across northern parts as we go through the evening tomorrow. None of it looks especially heavy, but some moderate bursts are possible. Clearer skies towards the south could take us into a bit of a chilly start on Saturday, but it definitely looks like the driest day of the long weekend before rain arrives through Sunday and Monday. Bye-bye.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10 to 5. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, St Albans is set to become the first smartphone-free city for children under the age of 14. Head teachers are urging parents to delay buying mobile phones for their kids, and the move comes after fears over the impact that the usage of smartphones can have on children's mental health and development, with some children as young as 7 having their own phones. Well, joining me now is maths teacher, author and broadcaster and West Ham fan, Bobby Siegel. Bobby, always a delight to have you on the show. This is an astonishing story. 20 out of 24 head teachers at the city's primary schools are begging parents not to buy phones for kids because of disruption they're seeing in classrooms. As a teacher, Bobby, does this make sense to you?
Yes, I completely agree with it. While I'm someone that always advocates the use of technology and how it is democratizing information for all people, the reality is in schools, when children have access to smartphones, it damages their education, it distracts them, there's a drop-off in academic performance, there's risk of bullying due to social pressures. I know they come to school, they're knackered because they've been on their phones scrolling all night. Their sort of mental development is stalled. For people under 14, I genuinely think there's no reason whatsoever to have a smartphone. If you're really concerned about your child's safety, give them those old Nokia brick phones, give them that thing, communicate with you, but there's no need for smartphones for younger children, because I think it just leads to so many developmental issues for these people. And I applaud the groups there that are looking to stop children under a certain age using it.
And, you know, Bobby, this also gets my vote. My daughter is in year 5. She's 10. I got a message this morning from my school saying there's been problems in year 5 with kids and they're falling out with each other outside of school times because of WhatsApp group fights. And then it's bringing itself back into the school gates. So even, Bobby, when they're not having phones at school, it's causing trouble they're bringing into school.
Yeah, again, but back when you were in school, I was in school, even like 5, 6, 7 years ago, students would be in school and they'd have to deal with issues in school, and they leave the gates at 3:30, 4 o'clock, go home, and they've got that sort of secluded, they know they're safe. Whereas now, they take the phone, they continue to take that, if they're part of a Snapchat group, WhatsApp group, or whatever it is, Instagram group, that bullying, if it exists, can continue to go on. So children that are vulnerable, they're exposed for all their evenings, their weekends, their holidays. So clearly we need to get ahead of that. And again, at some stage, adults, we need to make sure that, again, maybe the sixth formers, GCSE students, they get access to technology. But I think year 5s, year 6s, literally there's no need. Again, I've got friends that are becoming young parents now, and I tell them, don't give your children tablets, don't give them smartphones, because once children get this, almost like this, it's terrible example, it's like crack cocaine. Once you get addicted, it's so hard, even as an adult. Martin, sometimes I'm at night watching silly videos of cats dancing. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm a grown adult. I should put the phone away. How can children who are still developing mentally be able to resist that?
Super. So, I totally agree, Bobby Siegel. And, you know, the amount of problems it causes inside schools and outside schools. The problem, though, how would it be enforced? Is down to teachers like you to take their phones off them at school could cause trouble with the parents.
So I think this is where it's got to come from the top. And to be honest, a lot of schools do say, my secondary, for example, when schools are brought in, you give it in at form time and you collect it back at the end of the day. So schools need to be rigorous in ensuring that policy. And even if technology sort of teachers are keen on technology, say, we should encourage children to explore the world of technology. What they should do is have sanctioned things, tablets that they bring in, or the teachers say, you can use this in class time for specific moments, but not children to have it in their bags or their pockets. Absolutely, that's a no-no for me.
Totally agree. Bobby Seagull, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Are you going to sign off with your customary West Ham cross?
Always, because,
there you go, mate. Thank you very much. Bobby Seagull, always a pleasure to have you on the show. You take care, the voice of common sense on teaching matters as ever, Bobby Seagull. Now, coming up, as party leaders launch their campaigns, we'll be right across Britain as they compete for your votes on Britain's election channel. Chris Hope, our political editor, is out there right now on the Conservative Party battle bus. We'll catch up with him in the next hour. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. But now it's time for your weather, and it's Alex Burkill.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. We're sticking with a bit of a north-south split in our weather as we go through the rest of this week, with northern parts staying pretty wet because of the low-pressure centre that has brought so much rain recently lingering here. Further south, though, it's a different story. Some drier, brighter weather to end the day, and then we will have some clear skies across south-southeastern parts as we go overnight. Further north and elsewhere across the country, quite a cloudy picture, and there will be further outbreaks of rain. Some of them could be a little bit on the heavy side, could be some more flooding issues for some of us. Where we see the clear skies in the south, it may turn a little bit chilly overnight, but elsewhere, because of the cloudy, wet and for some blustery weather, it is going to be a relatively mild start to the day tomorrow. Taking a closer look first thing tomorrow morning, and across many parts of Scotland, quite a bit of cloud around, and there will still be some outbreaks of rain. Perhaps western parts of Scotland having some clearer skies, so it may be a little bit chilly first thing here. Otherwise, lots of cloud and outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland, Northern England and much of England and Wales. But further south, some brighter skies first thing. I mentioned that it could be a bit chilly first thing, but once the sun rises, those temperatures should start to climb quite quickly. As we go through the day tomorrow, it is going to be fairly similar to today, really. Across northern parts, further outbreaks of rain, though they don't look quite as heavy as today. Nonetheless, some heavier bursts are still possible. Always driest towards the south, a greater chance of seeing some sunshine here, but one or two showers could pop up. Temperatures for many look quite similar, perhaps starting to feel a bit warmer across northern parts compared to today. More showery rain across northern parts as we go through the evening tomorrow. None of it looks especially heavy, but some moderate bursts are possible. Clearer skies towards the south could take us into a bit of a chilly start on Saturday, but it definitely looks like the driest day of the long weekend before rain arrives through Sunday and Monday. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. The Western Bypass, the A1 on the southbound side of Birtley, junction 65. Now the exit slip to come off there is closed, long queues back after the Dunstan interchange for the best part of an hour. Back to junction 69, 2 lanes shut for emergency repairs. Big queues for the M4 in South Wales, eastbound closed, junction 38 Margam to Porthcawl 37. Westbound is open but just one lane at junction 37. Big queues either side of a police incident, westbound queue back to Bridgend. Eastbound back towards 41 at Bagleham, the A48 queuing both ways between Stormy Down and Tybach as traffic diverts. And if you're heading for the anti-clock M25 before Heathrow 14, a big queues back towards the M40 at 16, an earlier collision being recovered there. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. On today's show, we've got the very latest on the general election. Of course, the date has now been set. July the 4th is when the nation decides. We'll be live from all across the country to find out what that will mean for Britain. Plus, could there be a dramatic last-ditch coup to remove Rishi Sunak? Next up, has Nigel Farage betrayed Britain because he's dramatically announced he will not stand for Reform UK at the next general election and instead will head to the USA to help Donald Trump get elected? Was that the right thing to do to help the West battle against woke in America? Or should Nigel have stayed to fight on British soil? Get in touch all the usual ways. And of course, immigration is down. New figures out today show a 10% decrease in net migration to the UK, but that's from a record stratospheric high of 764,000, and that immigration is still more than the size of the combined populations of Nottingham, my home city, and Newcastle, and it's 3 times the 2019 total. Will we ever take back control of our borders? Welcome to the show. It's always a delight to have your company. So the battle lines have been drawn. The battle buses are out on the road. Our man Chris Hope is in Inverness in the Highlands with Scotland with Rishi Sunak's team as they attempt to get votes from all 4 corners of the UK. So Keir Starmer's team are also out and about. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage has withdrawn from the battlefield. He's heading to America. Was that the right thing to do, or should he have stayed to fight with Reform? Already had well over 1,000 comments on that. It's really got you going, and there's still time for you to have your say. You can get your contacts, your views across by going to gbnews.com/your say. This is your show. Get stuck in, and I'll read a bunch out before the end of the show. But before all of that, let's have your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. From the GB Newsroom at 5:02, your top story this hour. The Prime Minister says voters should back him if they want the Rwanda deportation scheme to succeed, but concedes flights won't get off the ground before the general election. Rishi Sunak also says he's putting the economy and global security at the heart of his campaign. It comes as political party leaders begin 6 weeks of trying to win votes after it was announced polls will be open on the 4th of July. The timing of the announcement came as a surprise to some, with Labour polling 20 points ahead. Kicking off the Conservatives' campaign this morning, Rishi Sunak claimed Labour would do absolutely nothing to stop the boats.
Everyone else is starting to agree with my approach, which is bold. The one person that doesn't is Keir Starmer. That's a choice at this election. He thinks that we should just offer an amnesty to illegal migrants to make us the soft touch of Europe. It would make us a magnet for thousands of migrants coming from everywhere. So that's the choice at this election. Do you think my plan is the right one? Do you think I'm the one that's taking bold action to secure our borders and to stop the boats? Or do you think he's going to do that? And it's pretty clear that on this issue, not only does he not share the country's values that it's a problem, he's going to do absolutely nothing about it.
And starting his election campaign in southeast England, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says that what the Conservatives have done to the country is unforgivable and voters don't need to put up with it.
Rishi Sunak clearly does not believe in his Rwanda plan. I think that's been clear from this morning because he's not going to get any flights off. I think that tells its own story. I don't think he's ever believed that plan is going to work, and so he's called an election early enough to have it not tested before the election. We have to deal with the terrible loss of control of the border under this government. We have to tackle the small boats that are coming across. Nobody but nobody should be making that journey.
Meanwhile, Lib Dems leader Sir Ed Davey says the Conservatives are out of touch.
For far too long, people across the United Kingdom have been let down and taken for granted by this Conservative government and this out-of-touch Conservative Party. But with this election, we have the chance to win the change our country so desperately needs.
In Scotland, First Minister John Swinney says most voters want to see the back of what he called the disaster of Conservative government.
Never has a government deserved to lose more than Rishi Sunak's government. You want higher living standards and a fairer country where everyone can lead secure, happy, healthy lives. You want a national health service you can rely upon. Most of you think that Brexit was a terrible mistake. You don't think Westminster works for Scotland, and you want Scotland to have a strong voice. All of those things sum up what I am about.
In other news, a 64-year-old man has been charged with assisting the Russian intelligence service. Howard Phillips has been remanded in custody after a counter-terrorism investigation into suspected offences under the National Security Act. He's expected to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court later this afternoon. A man has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years for a series of attacks in South London. Mohammed Nur targeted strangers and used a makeshift blade to kill Johannita Dogby in Brixton in May of last year. She was attacked from behind while walking alone during the day. Nur cut her throat and she died at the scene. The 34-year-old was also found guilty of 3 other slash attacks 2 days before her death. And a record number of more than 68,500 people were granted refugee status or other types of leave to remain in the year to March. Home Office figures show that's the highest number for any 12-month period since records began. Meanwhile, the total asylum backlog still stands at more than 100,000. And the family of a 10-year-old who died in a mudslide in North Yorkshire say she was a happy, bubbly, happy-go-lucky little girl. Primary school student Leah Harrison was killed yesterday afternoon after getting into difficulty near Carlton Bank. It's understood she was on a school trip at the time. Mount Pleasant Primary School say the incident is a heartbreaking tragedy and Leah was a much-loved part of the community. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, Rishi Sunak may have only called the upcoming snap election 24 hours ago, but he and Sir Keir Starmer are already trading blows as they battle to win your precious votes. Campaigning in Derbyshire this morning, the Prime Minister is seeking to draw dividing lines on evergreen issues like the economy and immigration. He also dubbed the Labour leader a man with no convictions who cannot be trusted. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer attacked the Conservative record on the economy and claimed the Prime Minister has never believed in his own Rwanda scheme. Let's go now to Downing Street and speak to GB News' political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, welcome to the show again. And some dramatic news in the last few minutes. Nigel Farage has made his position more clear. Earlier on, we felt he was going to go to America and not be involved at all in the general election in the UK. But he said, I'm afraid the bad news is Mr Sunak will be fighting and campaigning around the country for reform. Tell us more.
Yes, Nigel Farage very much trying to have his cake and eat it too. So this morning, the news that he was not going to be actively leading the Reform Party. He was not going to be standing as a candidate trying to get elected as an MP for what would be the 8th time, maybe potentially. But that in fact, he said, important though the general election is, the contest in the United States of America on November the 5th has huge global significance. A strong America as a close ally is vital for our peace and security, and I intend to help with the grassroots campaign in the USA in any way that I can. Now, a lot of people, I think, have taken exception to that. Basically, the idea that Nigel Farage has chosen the United States over Britain. But of course, people in CCHQ and the Conservative Party, and certainly I'm sure Rishi Sunak, will have been breathing a massive sigh of relief, because I think one of the reasons that Rishi Sunak called this election early was basically to take Nigel Farage out of the equation. He says he simply doesn't have time to find somewhere to stand and get this all rolling in 6 weeks. They were terrified of the effect that Nigel Farage might have had on Reform's vote share. But now he is saying, OK, I'm not going to stand, but I'm not going away. And if anybody thought I was, think again. He says, I will be out and about campaigning for reform over the next 6 weeks, up and down the country. Now, no doubt he is an incredibly talented political operator, whether you like him or whether you don't. He has a way of talking to people, a cut through that people like Donald Trump have, that people like Boris Johnson have. And he's politically, therefore, very dangerous to the government. But will the fact that he's out and about campaigning but not standing be enough to really help reform? And will people forgive him that he appears to have chosen the United States over Britain?
And Catherine Forster, the video that Mr Farage has just posted on his Twitter account on X rounds off by saying this: I've got one more big card to play in politics, but the timing isn't now. Catherine, that seems to be alluding to what many people will be thinking. Nigel's going to more or less sit this one out, at least as a candidate, watch the Conservatives lose the election, and then there's lots of talk about how the Conservative, the right, might rebuild itself in the future. Nigel already flashing his garter. There could be a comeback.
Well, yes, indeed. Oh, you've given me such an image of Nigel Farage flashing his garter, Martin. That's disturbed me. Anyway, yes, he could potentially, because we've heard lots of positive noises from many Conservative MPs towards Nigel Farage. He turned up at the Conservative Party conference last autumn. He was frankly given a rock star welcome. I saw it with my own eyes. He was mobbed. We've had people like Liz Truss, Conservative MP, former PM, saying, you know, Nigel Farage should come back and help rebuild the Conservative Party, you know, even though he was last a member of the Conservative Party decades ago. So there's certainly some in the party that would love to see him back. Of course, that would horrify many One Nation Conservatives. Let's see. There is another possibility, of course, which is that Donald Trump might give him a job if he comes to be president again. You know, it's going to be tight, isn't it? But that could well happen. So Nigel Farage thinks there is a big job somewhere, but whether it is back in Westminster or maybe over the pond in the United States, well, time will tell.
Catherine Forster, excellent as ever, live from Downing Street. And we do have that video now of Nigel Farage, that statement he just released to show you.
He may be relieved to know that I'm not going to stand as a candidate myself. Why? 6 weeks isn't long enough to fight a constituency seat. The bad news, Mr Sunak, is I'll be out round the country fighting, campaigning, appearing on media, supporting Richard Tice in absolutely every single way. Only reform, in my view, has the agenda that can reverse our national decline.
There you go. If you thought he was going anywhere, he's back. Now, get lots more on that story on our website. And thanks to you, GBNews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got breaking news and all of the brilliant analysis that you've come to expect from GB News. Now, moving on, Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have drawn swords over tackling illegal migration ahead of the 4th of July general election. The Prime Minister admitted astonishingly earlier today that the first flights to Rwanda will not take off before the general election, with the Labour leader slamming the government's plan and vowed to clean up the migration mess of 14 years of Tory leadership. Well, I'm now joined by Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, meanwhile, sets out his long-awaited plans for healthcare reform, promising to create an NHS fit for the future. But will they do enough to fix it? According to a doctor, this is the wrong bit. Look, let's now go to Mark White, our Homeland Security editor, to talk about the migration. Mark, we've had 3 hits of migration news today. First of all, that astonishing admission from Rishi Sunak this morning on the Rwanda flights not taken off. Then the legal migration data came in, and then we've also had some figures on rocketing asylum data. Tell us more.
Yes, well, the asylum data figures 68,000 asylum claims granted, or at least leave to remain here, if not asylum as such. And that's the biggest increase for some 40 years. So that's an issue of concern, absolutely. The issue of concern around the Rwanda flights is, of course, that admission from Rishi Sunak in his round of interviews this morning that we might not get any flights. In fact, the likelihood from what he was saying is that we wouldn't get any flights leaving before the 4th of July. I mean, there's a real plus side to the decision to bring the election forward, as he has done, to the 4th of July. And we were discussing it yesterday, which is you avoid that period of many more boats coming across the channel, many more people claiming asylum to bump up the asylum claims even more, and many more people then entering the system that might have to be pushed out to Rwanda on flights at some point. And that is by avoiding the flat calm conditions of late July, August and September, then you perhaps don't see the numbers coming across as high as potentially we are seeing at the moment. Because, Martin, we're about 36, 37% up on where we were last year. And tomorrow, according to my sources down in Dover, we're looking at a pretty good day in the English Channel, and we are only 120, 121 off reaching that figure of 10,000, which is a milestone figure so early in the year to reach. So if that comes on the very week that Rishi Sunak calls the election, that's going to be bad news for him. Let's see what the weather does overnight and whether we get that influx of more boats coming across the channel.
Yeah, immigration is going to be a huge election issue, Mark, and it makes you wonder, have either of them got the confidence of the electorate? Rishi Sunak talks tough, but the record speaks for themselves. Has anything you've heard so far from the Labour Party, from Sir Keir Starmer, does it indicate to you that they're going to clamp down even harder?
I have to say, this area of migration for Labour is a potential weak point that could be exploited by Rishi Sunak, by the Conservatives in the coming weeks. I was listening again to Yvette Cooper, who, you know, is telling us that we need to get rid of the gimmicks, and Labour will absolutely be able to deal with the illegal migration crisis. But I don't really hear anything in the Labour proposals, and I haven't heard anything in Labour's proposals over recent months that would convince me that they have a plan that would do this. What do they want to do? Well, they want to channel more money into the National Crime Agency to go after the people smugglers at source and to create this new border security command. Well, yeah, you can, play about with the way in which the investigations and operations are commanded. Is that going to bring the results that you want in the form of dismantling these people smuggling gangs? I don't think so. It's a multi-million-pound industry that has a sophisticated supply chain in operation now, and no end of people willing to come in every time one particular group are taken out by law enforcement, a bit like we see with the drugs trade. It's well established now internationally, this human trafficking, the smuggling operation right around the world. And then the other issues, say from Labour, is the issue of trying to process asylum seekers more quickly. Well, yeah, you can do that. You can take 1,000 more processing staff on and ensure that you've done that. You've reached a conclusion on these asylum applications. But then what do you do with them after? If there are those you're not granting asylum, where do you put them if you haven't got a third country to send them to, and you can't send them back to unsafe countries? So I'm not convinced that Labour really has the answers either. And it's one potential avenue of exploitation for the government going forward here.
Mark White, excellent as ever. And that's it. On July the 4th, the nation decides who will clamp down on immigration. Remains to be seen. Mark White, thank you as ever. Now, moving on, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer sets out his long-awaited plans for healthcare reform, promising to create an NHS, quote, that's fit for the future. But will they do enough to fix it? Well, according to a doctor with 50 years' experience and a former director at the World Health Organization, the NHS is so broken it needs urgent and radical reform. And that doctor now joins us. It's Carol Sikora, the oncologist and former director of the World Health Organization's cancer program. Dr. Sikora, always a delight to speak to you, a beacon of common sense during lockdowns. You got so much right, and now you're telling us that the NHS needs dramatic reform. In fact, you've got a 6-point plan. Tell us about it.
Someone's got to take action, Martin. It just can't go on the way it's going. And the sort of tweets you get from the current health minister are really not helpful, boasting that England's dropping a little bit in the waiting list as opposed to Wales, which is Labour. This is electioneering. We don't need that. We need a plan. The first thing in the plan is to admit there's a problem. That is the key, right the way through the system. It's bureaucratic, it's rotten, there's too many committees, there's too many people on salaries above 100,000 that push papers around on a desk and go home at 5 o'clock. The second problem is get rid of the waiting list. We can't sit there with 7 million people wanting something. The only way to do that quickly is to pay overtime to frontline clinical staff and give the responsibility to solving the waiting times to the people at the front of the business end of the NHS, those that deal with patient care. We've got to utilize technology. Everyone's got a mobile phone, and you can do a variety of things with it, but you can't make a GP appointment, you can't change your outpatient appointment, you can't get results from hospitals, you might be able to from GPs and so on. Then it's all about leadership. We've got the leaders in the wrong place. We don't need them in a smart office in Elephant and Castle, the headquarters of NHS England. We need them in the field. They need to be responsible for defined functions. In my case, radiotherapy or chemotherapy delivery. And then we've got to promote a meritocracy in the system. We've got to promote people that come in at the beginning that are talented should be able to get to the very top. A healthcare assistant should get to the top. Tony Blair's idea, believe it or not, from 25 years ago nearly, the NHS University. Talented people are there, but they can't progress beyond the way they've been appointed in. Let's change that system. And finally, the most important thing is to stop the bureaucracy from overtaking the function. And that's what we've really seen. And that's why I say it's rotten to the core. Of course, it can be made better, but it needs more than political bickering, which I'm afraid for the next 6 weeks, that's what we're going to see. I'd just like someone to say, let's grab it and get it better now.
You know, Kara Sikora, such common sense. Every time I speak to you, I just wish we had people like you running the country. Stand for office. I'll give you my vote. Kara Sikora, always a delight to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much for that common sense. Now, coming up, Rishi Sunak has called a snap summer election, but how are the Tories faring in the polls? Well, I'll be joined by a pollster shortly. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you.
That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Well, Welsh farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones is a first-language Welsh speaker and joins us now. Gareth, I mean, a lot of people will be thinking, hang on, this guy is a Welsh teacher. He speaks English. He knew what was on the parking ticket. He's just trying to make a point. He's being a prat, isn't he?
No, hey, come on, mate. I'm a first language Welsh. It's important that we watch after our language and, you know, that everything's bilingual. For us in Wales, you wouldn't go to France and expect your ticket to be in English, would you? You know, English is the most spoken language, but let's watch after these small languages. It's part of our cultural. So, you know what, I take my hat off to the guy. Fair play to him to go out and to fight this. But what it's done is put it onto the mainstream media, and you're talking about it, even that you're calling them that. You know, at least we're having a discussion about it, and it's putting the Welsh language in the forefront. And,
so,
you know,
Gareth,
speaking Welsh is important.
Yeah, so Gareth, this is a matter of principle. Is there a sense that the Welsh language is being eradicated in Wales? Is this something that the Welsh people need to rise up against?
Well, Welsh government are trying to, you know, bring a lot more Welsh speaking into our daily life and teach people how to speak Welsh. Well, everything should be bilingual then. And I think, you know, it should start with government. So government should be putting pressure on these companies to make sure everything is bilingual. So I get behind this guy. Fair play to him. It's a good stance, and it puts it in the public eye. Let's have everything in both languages, especially Welsh, because that's my first language. And I'm
you know what? If I was Welsh, if I were Welsh, I think I would agree with you. I think I would agree with you, Gareth.
It depends if you come from Wrexham.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:26. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, one question many of us are asking is why did Rishi Sunak decide to call an election with his party over 20 points behind in the opinion polls? Well, it was expected that the Prime Minister would wait until the autumn to call the nation to the polls, by which time the economy may have picked up and flights carrying illegal immigrants to Rwanda would have begun to take off. So that's now got the thoughts of the founder and the CEO of Electoral Calculus, Martin Baxter. Martin, welcome to the show. So the last time you were on, you had your spreadsheet open. You can tell at a stroke of a finger what small differences make in terms of the seats and the percentiles. Martin, can we talk about the dramatic developments in the last half hour? Nigel Farage now said that he will campaign with the Reform Party, although he won't stand. And we've been expecting, haven't we, a sort of difference in between, 10%, maybe getting Reform up to 16%. So how much of a difference does that make to the election? And can you tell us what an impact that might have on the election, on the Conservative seats and the final outcome?
Sure. The first thing to say, obviously, is that Reform at the moment don't look like they're going to win any seats themselves.
but they can stop the Conservatives winning many, many seats by taking votes away from the Conservatives, from disgruntled Conservative voters. So a very rough rule of thumb is every 1% of swing from the Conservatives to Reform costs the Conservatives another 10 seats. So if Nigel Farage, say, had stood and had really led the Reform Party, perhaps gained 5% in the polls, might be a figure there, then that would have cost the Conservatives another 50 seats. And then the Conservatives would be in danger of being eclipsed by the Liberal Democrats and wouldn't even be the second largest party in Parliament. On the other hand, if the Reform vote completely collapsed and all of that went back to the Conservatives, that could give the Conservatives 100 seats more than they might be expecting. So it's only a very big issue for the Conservatives as to how popular Reform is.
Yeah, and Rishi Sunak would have been hoping that Nigel had gone away, but as I said, in the last half hour, he said no, he will be out on the battleground trying to drum up votes for the Reform Party. In terms of all of the polling that you've been feeding into your system at Electoral Calculus, how are you calling this? I mean, obviously it's a movable feast. We've got a long time to go, but 6 weeks isn't a huge period of time, Martin. What are the runes? What's the writing on the wall?
Well, the big lettering, the big writing on the wall is that Labour are 21% ahead, and it's pretty impossible to lose an election if that's what happens in the end. The Conservatives will be hoping, of course, that there's a bit of error in the polls, maybe, as there has been before, and that perhaps Keir Starmer does not survive well under the scrutiny of an election campaign. Equally, Rishi Sunak has not tested himself in that way, and I guess both parties are remembering the sad example of Theresa May, who ran a very presidential-style campaign, but the more she talked, the less popular she became. So you can see movement in the campaign. It would have to be a lot of movement to make the 21% lead disappear entirely, but it might shrink it if it goes the Conservatives' way. Equally, you never know, things might get even, could go in a different direction. Nobody can predict which way the campaign swing will go.
So, Martin, just say that the Farage effect is at its most positive, and just say we see the biggest upswing to Reform that's likely. In terms of the metrics, in terms of the seats the Conservative Party would have at the end of all of this, what are we looking at?
If Reform do very well, as a colleague of mine said, there is no floor in British politics until you get to zero. The Conservatives can go all the way down. If all their voters leave them, they will get no seats. And the scenario you mentioned, the Conservatives could be around 50 seats, with similar level to the Lib Dems. They might not even be the official opposition. But a word of caution on that. I think Farage just saying that he's going to campaign actively is not the same as Farage standing for a seat or leading the Reform Party. So I'd be sceptical about whether this is going to make a massive difference to the Reformers' vote share, but we will keep watching and find out.
And Martin, there's been talk, or maybe it's optimistic talk, wishful thinking perhaps, from Rishi Sunak, the Conservatives, of a hung Parliament. Is that, in terms of the metrics you're looking at, the data at your fingertips that you update by the hour, is that a possibility even?
Everything could happen, but it requires many things to go in the Conservatives' favour at once. So polling error, Keir Starmer to be very unpopular in the campaign, Reform to collapse, and a lot of disgruntled Conservatives who are planning to stay at home deciding to vote for the Conservative Party anyway. If all of those things happen, then yes, you could get a scenario like a hung Parliament, but it's getting an incredibly narrow path to getting there.
It's looking vanishingly unlikely. So, Martin Baxter, in a nutshell, the direction of travel now, without major upsets, without anything strategically going hugely wrong, which of course could happen, what's your prediction for the next general election?
A Labour landslide bigger than Blair's.
There we go. There we have it. Martin Baxter, the founder and the CEO of Electoral Calculus. Thank you for coming on and imparting your mighty wisdom. There's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, and the campaign trails have started with parties across the country kicking off, and we'll bring you all the latest lines here on GB News. But first, it's your headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. It's 5:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Some breaking news to bring you. Police Scotland has confirmed it submitted a report to the prosecution service in relation to former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell. He was charged in connection with the embezzlement of party funds last month. The force went on to say it's unable to comment further as the investigation continues. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused the Prime Minister of never believing in his own Rwanda plan. It's after Rishi Sunak admitted flights carrying migrants will not take off before the general election in July. However, speaking as he started his election campaign in Derbyshire, the Conservative leader says the scheme will continue if he's re-elected. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage has confirmed he won't be standing as a candidate, but will help the Reform UK campaign. Mohamed Noor has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years for a series of attacks targeting strangers in South London. He was convicted of the murder of Yohanita Kasiwa Daubney, whose throat was cut with a makeshift blade in Brixton in May last year. Noor was also found guilty of 3 other attacks 2 days before her death. And a record number of more than 68,500 people were granted refugee status or other types of leave to remain in the year to March. Home Office figures show that's the highest number for any 12-month period since records began. Meanwhile, the total asylum backlog still stands at more than 100,000. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2713 and €1.1747 euros. The price of gold is £1,845 and 18 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's closed at 8,339 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, my name is Johnny Ratner with your latest. Long queues continue south of Edinburgh, where the Edinburgh City bypass remains shut westbound at the Dreghorn Junction because of flooding, and on the A1 in Tyne and Wear. The southbound exit remains shut for a second day at the Burtley exit, junction 65. That's for those emergency repairs. 2 lanes are closed on the main carriageway with long delays back towards Newcastle. East London, Bethnal Green and Cambridge Heath Road, that's still closed for accident investigation work. There are long delays on the M4 heading west just after junction 37 as you head away from Bridgend towards Swansea. A car's broken down near the Pyle exit. The 2 left lanes are closed. It was already slow on that stretch after an earlier police investigation. And on public transport, of anti-West Coast trains are suspended. Preston to Edinburgh Waverley and Glasgow Central. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
So there are migrants who come here and they make a big contribution and they pay a lot of tax. And some types of migration from some countries, that's particularly the case.
On that, sorry, Neil,
others,
on that, you say migrants from the Middle East, North Africa and Turkey, aged 25 to 64, are almost twice as likely to be economically inactive as someone born in the UK. So essentially, we've invited people to come here. Presumably, we believe they're going to then work. And then they're twice as likely to be economically inactive. I mean, that's a recipe for economic disaster.
Yeah, so in the last census, we saw that the employment rate of people who are born in the UK is higher than the employment rate of people who've come here from another country. And that tells you that migration policy is not on track at all. And as I say...
Hang on, doesn't that just account for those dependents that are brought with them? So people from the Middle East and North Africa are much more likely to have, for example, a wife who stays at home and a husband who goes out to work. That largely would account for having half as much economic activity.
No, so I should have said, what I meant is even among those who are of working age, excluding the dependents and the children and so on, the employment rate is lower. Now, for some groups
because
from
some
countries...
people stay at home to look after children, perhaps?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who are economically inactive for that reason. There's a lot more higher rates of unemployment as well among some groups. And if you look, broadly speaking, the trend is that people who come here from rich countries, from either Western Europe or from countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the US and so on, they tend to have very high employment rates and very high earnings as well, and you get clearly a benefit from that. But then if you have a lot of migration from low-skilled people, particularly from poor countries, who have an incentive to come here, even if they're ending up working in the minimum wage, because it's still a lot more than in a very poor country, then you will tend to see people who have either quite low rates of employment for the reasons you're just describing, and also potentially quite low wages as well. So they're very unlikely to be net contributors to the
Neil,
exchequer.
let's not pretend that the immigration debate is all about economics.
Welcome back to 5:38. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now, over 1,000 of you have got in touch. The debate of the day was Nigel's decision to not stand in the general election for Reform UK. Initially, earlier this morning, when Nigel said he was going to America, a lot of people thought he was completely abandoning British politics. But that has been updated in the last hour. Nigel has spoken. Let's look at a clip.
You may be relieved to know that I'm not going to stand as a candidate myself. Why? 6 weeks isn't long enough to fight a constituency seat. The bad news, Mr. Sunak, is I'll be out round the country fighting, campaigning, appearing on media, supporting Richard Tice in absolutely every single way. Only Reform, in my view, has the agenda that can reverse our national decline.
So again, Nigel won't be standing as a candidate, but he will be campaigning across the country with Reform UK. He was saying 6 weeks isn't long enough to fight a campaign of this nature. So initially the Conservatives were calling this election to try and cook the goose of Nigel Farage. In fact, last night he said that this just isn't long enough. But he did say only Reform has the agenda to reverse our national decline. A few of you have been getting in touch. Michael said this: no way has Nigel betrayed this country. Individually, he has done more for this country than any other politician since Winston Churchill. Yasmin, however, is a bit more disdainful about Nigel's decision to go and campaign with Donald Trump. He said, in my opinion, Nigel Farage is all about himself and money, money, money. Don't forget, that has been overtaken by events. That video is the latest, and a candid clue was dangled at the end of that clip. It's on Nigel's Twitter account. You can watch it in full. He said this: I've got one more big card to play in politics, but the timing isn't now. So a lot of people have been saying to me today, is this the right time? Or, as Napoleon Bonaparte said, never interrupt when your enemy is making a mistake. Is the time for Nigel to return after the Labour Party win the next election, which is looking increasingly likely? And now to discuss that, let's talk to the Labour MP, Lord. Let's move on now to a Labour Party MP who can join us right now on the show. Welcome to the show. It's Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Hello, mate. Here we are, Labour MP for Brighton, Kemp Town, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Welcome to the show. So we've been speaking to two big pollsters today, Lloyd. The first one, Sir John Curtis, said... Oh, his line's frozen. What a shame. OK, look, when he comes up, I was going to put this to him. We've spoken to two big pollsters on today's show. We spoke at the top of the show to Sir John Curtis, who actually knows everything about polling. What he doesn't know, he's forgotten about. He said, with 21 points behind for such a consistent period of time, it would take a campaigning skill, the like of which he'd never seen in political history, for Rishi Sunak to be able to overturn this deficit. So he said no matter what the campaigning, it'd be unlikely to ever be able to overturn that. Now, a short while ago, we spoke to Martin Baxter. He's the CEO and the founder of Electoral Calculus. He's been running all of the numbers. He's got a spreadsheet which allows him to update it by the hour. And when I pushed him, even with a full Reform effect, Nigel Farage having the full effect, given the big uplift, even though he's not standing as a candidate, he predicted the biggest election wipeout for the Conservative Party since 1997. He's predicting a landslide as big as 97, the Labour landslide. So all of the writing on the wall seems to be bad news for Rishi Sunak. We've been out and about with the Conservatives today. Chris Hope is in Scotland at present on the Conservative battle bus to see what they're up to, and their mood seems to be high. We can now try again to get a connection with the Labour MP for Brighton Kemp Town, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Can you hear us this time, Lloyd?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I can. Fabulous stuff. So we were just talking there. I've been speaking to a variety of pollsters, and they more or less have Labour nailed on to win this general election. But of course, you don't want to get complacent, Lloyd. But can I first ask you, how surprised were you about this snap election being called yesterday in July? The Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has been wanting an early election all along, but many in the Tory corner felt a later election would be a better thing. How surprised are you?
Well, of course, we were all caught slightly by surprise. But if you look at the economic figures that came out yesterday, it's not actually surprising. The headline figure looks quite good, 2.3% inflation. But if you look at actually what's important, the consumer inflation figure, which is actually what you're spending in shops, that's over 5% still. It's stubborn and it's not going down. And there's some talk about it going up. Fuel prices might go up in the second half of the year, as they often do as you go into the winter. And that would mean overall inflation would start rising again. That would have effect on mortgage prices. We know that the borrowing has gone through the roof under the Conservatives, and the Chancellor was going to have no chance to introduce his giveaway autumn statement. All those things, I think, suddenly hit Rishi, and he realised that he was a goner, and he might as well go now, save the country some time, and hope that he can pull the wool over the eyes of the country. I don't think it's going to work, because I think that the people know they've caused such a mess economically, and they need to get out.
And Lloyd, there was an astonishing admission on the first morning of the election campaign when Rishi Sunak appeared to admit that no flights would get off to Rwanda before the general election. I mean, how did you react to that?
Well, that, I think, shows what a gimmick the Rwanda deal is. Have they focused on strengthening the border? Have they focused on getting deals and return agreements with other countries? Have they focused on proper and legal routes? No, they haven't done any of that. They've got this gimmick of Rwanda, which I don't think anyone's ever going to be sent to. And I would prefer us to have focused on the real things that matters. But that's the problem with the Tories. It's all gimmick and no substance.
But, Lloyd, we need to turn to the Labour Party's potential solution for this. It was incredible earlier this week when Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, was in Vienna, and we had the situation where 15 European Union member states are writing to Ursula von der Leyen demanding something similar, a third country deal. The Labour Party said you're going to cancel Rwanda on day one, if it even ever happens. So the big question is, Lloyd, what would the Labour Party do to cut down on immigration, both illegal and legal? It's going to be a huge issue at the general election. What's your sell?
Well, the third-party deals are not bad in principle. We arranged a deal with Albania, for example, and it reduced the numbers of people that were coming over. Having processing centres like Australia has with third parties works when you also provide fair and transparent routes. What doesn't work is sending people to a country that's at war with another country next door anyway, and has very little competency in dealing with the complex asylum cases that we have. And finally, it was a deal of both ways. Rwanda could still send their most difficult refugees to us. So it was madness all around. Labour believed that there should be third-party deals across Europe to ensure that people are safe and supported where they are. So to discourage them needing to travel long distances, we believe we need to crack down on the people smugglers that often give people false hope. And then once they are here, leave people in a life of slavery. That's the kind of thing that we can focus on, making sure we have people's lives better where they are, and we clamp down on the criminals where they're here.
OK, Lloyd, so what kind of third country deals are you talking about? I mean, Tony Blair, back in the day, he actually looked at an African-style containment scheme, which actually sounds very like Rwanda. You know, successive Labour Prime Ministers have pledged to bring migration down, both legal and illegal. What other countries are you talking about? What, Greece, Albania? And what would that look like on the ground?
Well, I think you have to do deals with all the bordering countries that are taking next to conflict zones or taking the bulk of refugees. And you see how that's worked in Albania. I wouldn't want to list now all the countries that they could be. And I think you put the finger on the pulse there, didn't you? Labour looked at an African deal previously, and we didn't do it because it wasn't going to be successful and it wasn't going to be good value for the Exchequer. And what's important is we find something that's good value for the Exchequer, ensures that we get the people that we need in this country. We have a falling birth rate, so we do need some immigration. You know, kind of the average couple only have 1.4 children in this country. It doesn't even replace the people we have here. And we need to ensure that we're training the people up who are here to be able to have good, fruitful lives. All those things need to be done. And if you try and just do a Rwanda in isolation, it doesn't work. And Australia has found the same as well, with small boats arriving in Australia very recently because the deterrent system, without a proper system of legal routes, doesn't work.
But Lloyd, the problem you're going to have is if you try and do a deal with any of those countries, such as Greece, then they're European Union member states. Brussels will say no chance whatsoever. They'll refer you back to the European Union headquarters and they'll say if you want any kind of deal with those countries, then we want a returns deal where the UK will have to take a share of the immigration going into those 27 member states, and the net result will be more people coming into Britain. Macron has said this will happen. Brussels has said this will happen. What you're saying is for the birds.
Well, we did an Albania deal, and that worked very successfully in reducing the number of Albanians who were coming over. I'm not sure Greece is necessarily the country you would first look at doing a deal. Turkey clearly would be, because they border Syria and Iraq and some countries that are in conflict at the moment, Armenia as well. So you would choose your countries cleverly, and you would go and negotiate, and you would see what the arrangements can be. Of course, if the European Union don't want to play ball, we would have to find other countries to play ball with us. But I find when you get people around the table, there's a lot of political hot air, and I give as much political hot air as the next man. But when you get around the negotiating table, you usually find a deal can be struck, and it will be win-win.
OK, superb stuff. Thanks for joining us on the show. Labour MP for Brighton, Kemp Town, Lloyd Russell-Moore. Always a delight to have you. Now, coming up, we'll be expecting to hear from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as he begins his campaign trail across the country. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. We're sticking with a bit of a north-south split in our weather as we go through the rest of this week, with northern parts staying pretty wet because of the low pressure centre that has brought so much rain recently lingering here. Further south though, it's a different story. Some drier, brighter weather to end the day, and then we will have some clear skies across south-southeastern parts as we go overnight. Further north and elsewhere across the country, quite a cloudy picture, and there will be further outbreaks of rain. Some of them could be a little bit on the heavy side, could be some more flooding issues for some of us. Where we see the clear skies in the south, it may turn a little bit chilly overnight, but elsewhere, because of the cloudy, wet and for some blustery weather, it is going to be a relatively mild start to the day tomorrow. Taking a closer look first thing tomorrow morning, and across many parts of Scotland, quite a bit of cloud around, and there will still be some outbreaks of rain. Perhaps western parts of Scotland having some clearer skies, so it may be a little bit chilly first thing here. Otherwise, lots of cloud and outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland, Northern England and much of England and Wales. But further south, some brighter skies first thing. I mentioned that it could be a bit chilly first thing, but once the sun rises, those temperatures should start to climb quite quickly. As we go through the day tomorrow, it is going to be fairly similar to today, really. Across northern parts, further outbreaks of rain, though they don't look quite as heavy as today. Nonetheless, some heavier bursts are still possible. Always driest towards the south, a greater chance of seeing some sunshine here, but one or two showers could pop up. Temperatures for many look quite similar, perhaps starting to feel a bit warmer across northern parts compared to today. More showery rain across northern parts as we go through the evening tomorrow. None of it looks especially heavy, but some moderate bursts are possible. Clearer skies towards the south could take us into a bit of a chilly start on Saturday, but it definitely looks like the driest day of the long weekend before rain arrives through Sunday and Monday. Bye-bye.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frothy in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Gloria Di Piero. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:52 now. We're expecting to be hearing from Rishi Sunak soon at a press conference. Before that, I've got a few emails to send. I've had over 1,000 in today on the huge topic of Nigel Farage. Earlier in the day, he said that he wasn't standing as a candidate, and many people believed that meant he'd be going straight to America and wouldn't be taking part in the British general election whatsoever. That turned out not to be the case. About an hour ago, Nigel released a statement, and so he basically said, no, I've got one last card left in me politically, but the timing isn't right now. But he did confirm that he will be fighting on the front line, campaigning across the country with Reform UK. So the debate earlier was, is Nigel running away? Is he betraying Britain? That's now been outmoded. Got a few of you getting in touch. And Kay says this: the people who have given their wholehearted support to you are utterly disappointed, and we feel that the Reform Party will not succeed without your full support, which will leave us without a party to vote for, and Britain will remain in dire straits. Nigel, your country needs you. Another point here about Donald Trump is the bigger battle over the pond, to the battle to fight for the free world. Tony says this: Donald Trump has bought our best chance of a decent future in Great Britain. I'm seriously disappointed in Nigel Farage, and that's not a good thing to say, because I support everything and every word he has previously stood for. But you can still turn it around. And in fact, Tony, that's the point. You know, Nigel now has said that he will be campaigning with Reform until the next election, and then he will go to America. So an astonishing day in politics, very fast-moving day. We're expecting a press conference from Rishi Sunak soon, but that'll roll into the next show, because of course it's Jubes & Co after me, 6 till 7. I'll be back tomorrow, 3 till 6 p.m. Thanks for your company. Thanks for all your emails. Hundreds and hundreds of them. You all care about your country, but now it's your weather, and it's Alex Burkle.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Southern areas will stay mostly dry as we go through the end of the week, but it's a wetter story further north, because the same area of low pressure that has brought all the rain we've had through the last day or so is lingering across the UK. So we can expect further outbreaks of rain as we go through the end of today, overnight and into Friday. Some of the rain will be a little bit on the heavy side, but it is definitely easing. Further south, it's going to stay largely dry overnight, and there will be some clear skies under which it could turn a bit fresh, a bit chilly perhaps for some of us to start first thing tomorrow morning. But on the whole, once the sunshine gets going, temperatures should rise quite quickly. If we take a look at what's going to happen first thing tomorrow morning, and yes, it's a bit of a cloudy, damp start across many northern parts, particularly across a big chunk of Scotland. Cloud and outbreaks of rain. None of it looks particularly heavy, but could cause some further issues for areas affected by the heavy rain we've seen recently. Perhaps some brightness across western parts of Scotland, but across Northern Ireland, much of England and Wales, a fairly cloudy and a little bit damp start. The best chance of any sunshine first thing tomorrow morning will be across southern parts, and to be honest, here's where we're likely to see the best of the sunshine as we go through tomorrow. As a result of the sunshine, though, we could see a few showers popping up, but it is generally going to be drier towards southern parts, a little bit cloudier and a bit wetter further north. Some outbreaks of rain, perhaps the odd heavy shower here, but not as wet as it has been recently. The temperatures will be near normal for the time of year, feeling warm in any sunshine. In fact, across northern parts, it will feel markedly less fresh than it has done recently. As we go into Saturday, perhaps a bit of a chilly start for some of us, but it does look like the driest, sunniest day of the long weekend. A few showery outbreaks developing, particularly towards eastern parts, but on Sunday, we are expecting some more wet weather to push its way in. Some of that could be pretty heavy at times, and more showers perhaps on Monday too.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The
latest GB News travel.
Good evening, my name is